Hello and welcome everybody back to the Game Dev Show. I'm here with Jason Story, Yorai, and Andrew today. We might have some other guests popping in later on to talk about some interesting, I think, pretty cool announcements. So I wanted to say hi to everybody, let everybody say hello and say hi in chat. Oh, I also wanted to mention I got something really cool to give away later on today. Did I tell you guys about this? I don't think I have. So I was talking to the Cinti guys, and they sent over some gift cards. So along with rider codes, I got some Cinti gift cards to give away. So I was thinking maybe we'll do them like first place can pick which one they want, the gift card or the license, and then second place can take the second one or something. And maybe we start getting some more things. So I figured I should tell everybody about that. I'll open up the giveaway in a little bit for everybody that's interested in that. So before we get started, please like, subscribe, share the stream and all that stuff. And hello, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Jason, you didn't say hi.
Yeah.
I waved earlier. Okay, look, just if I'm ever a little less responsive today, it's because Irish people don't deal with heat, and it's warmer than usual, which is why I look like various shades of tomato right now. So just keep, I may not be as responsive as usual.
It's the color grading that's doing the tomato bit.
Wait for you to just pass out from heat stroke. Jason just falls over. It gets hot for sure. Is it how hot is it over there? By the way, I still don't really know Ireland weathers.
I never check it. I just know that when I'm out walking and I feel like I might collapse, it's like that's the mark for me. And I don't need to know a number. I just need to know whether or not I feel like I need to sit down.
Just vary, huh? Cool. So I think the plan for today, we had a couple little topics to talk about, and then I wanted to dive into lots of game dev questions because we had a lot last time, and I figured people would kind of start submitting a bunch more. So if you had any game dev specific questions, something about Unity development or any other game development stuff, please just drop them in the chat, and I'll start popping them up. 1 second here.
Yeah, sure. So actually, while we're thinking about it, Jason, do you have anything to say regarding lookup tables for colors? Because you seem to have a lot of them, and you keep switching them very nicely. So
actually, as a cheat, this isn't a lookup table this time. I got lazy because so I've been normally I do use lookup tables. I use OBS, and you can tweak it there, and that's all good and well. They're also really easy to find. There's actually a website. I wish I can send you the link later. There's literally a free website that's a database of like 2 million lookup tables, and you can search for it, pick your camera version, pick what grading you're picking on your camera. It's really specific. Or you can buy packs from various YouTubers. I think the one that you normally see me use, which is, might as well pull it up as an example. This one is called Nectar, and I'm pretty sure that I forgot which YouTuber that is, but basically I went through a binge of finding a lot of video maker YouTubers and would just grab the ones that appealed to me. But right now, this is actually surprisingly, the reason it's redder than usual is it's not actually graded. It is the camera's profile. So for people who have a Sony camera, you can change your profiles to be something like log or basically high dynamic range, right? So the pictures look washed out. If you ever watched the movie in a like pre-state before it's been released, it's often very gray and colorless. And you might be wondering why that's the case. Well, because if you don't grade in the camera, you capture the most amount of dark and the most amount of light, and then you have the most freedom for color grading in the camera, and then you can apply a lot, blah, blah, blah. Now, long story short, I've been doing a little video recording diary entry each morning, and I was getting really fed up of messing with LUTs for absolutely no reason. And so I ended up just resetting the profile system on the camera and just putting it to the default Sony, a bit overbright, a bit saturated, shiny one, because it's good enough for what I needed. And I hadn't gotten around to change it before this before this show. So so this isn't the LUT right now. But to answer your question, honestly, they are pretty much everywhere. If you just go on a hunt for trying to find them, most YouTubers sell a pack for about 10-15 euro. If you find someone that has a look you like, I recommend people like Gerald Undone and DSLR Video Shooter. I'm assuming they have them. Peter McKinnon has one. There's so many. Just any video person probably has their own look pack. Or like I said, there's a website that has loads of free ones. I'll find the link for you actually.
Sure. I actually brought it up because I'm lately taking more effort to analyze how I like different scenes in games, and I've noticed that a lot of them are using like loots that make the game look colder, and then they make like really vibrant abilities, and they kind of nudge the loot off as soon as the ability starts, and they nudge it back as soon as it ends. So the game feels more colorful as soon as you see the ability, and then the world gets back to being somber, and it's pretty interesting when you think about it.
Yeah, it's kind of similar effect to like high dynamic range, where you have everything is purposely lengthened so it looks duller on average, but then the high points look higher than normal, and it really adds an impact.
Yeah, and even just in artificial HDR, where you have the bloom effect, like popping everything off, and if you turn the bloom off, everything looks really, really weird.
I got bombed by a dog, but
It's the first guest.
Yes, the first guest visitor. She was very excited, but we got a bunch of questions while I was helping her. I don't know if you guys have answers to any of these. The first one was about implementing video chat in Unity games. Have you guys added video chat to a game before? Audio chat and text chat, there's lots of options I know about, but video, I can't think of anything.
Only once, and I've had a couple of clients ask for it, and we've effectively said no because, just as a funny side note, oftentimes when a client says, "Oh, we want video chat," and I'm like, "Okay, let me outline the difference in cost and time for video chat versus audio chat. Like how there's a huge chasm of difference in the two, and also the bandwidth requirements and all the stuff. And once you explain it, they kind of realize, oh, we thought it was just like one or the other. They're similar. It's like no, the way it works is fundamentally different. But to answer your question, the only way I've done it in the past is back in the early VR days, there was a major uptick in all of the like VR chat style stuff. And we quickly realized that a lot of the web features you're used to in an application in Unity can all just be simulated through a Chromium browser window. And so there is limitations in doing that, but the truth is, rather than try to roll your own video platform or something, there's a hell of a lot of really good video web providers out there, like literally services you can pay that's like your own mini Zoom, but it's like a private license one with an API key and whatever. I can't think of any right now. It's been a while since I've done it. But again, if like there are video provider software, they'll give you connection endpoints and URLs you can go to, and you can just load it up in a Chromium browser on your side. And then the other one is a login web page, kind of like Restream, and then you can talk between them. So that's probably the easiest solution. There's obviously limitations in bandwidth and various other things, but considerably simpler than trying to do your own, video stuff.
Makes sense. So just using up the Chromium browser. We used that for a bunch of things in the past too.
Watching YouTube videos is a great one if you want to have anything that would like integrate that way. And then you can kind of do some sneaky stuff like they did with Audio Shield, where you'd use a Chromium browser to watch a YouTube video and then capture the audio from the YouTube video and then use that to make audio interactive stuff because you're streaming without having to actually have it and have the light. It's a whole thing. It's a lot of really clever uses.
Yeah, even like tutorial videos. When you talk about it, videos reminds me of that. Like I see that all the time. Like people would put tutorials, build them in HTML and other stuff, so you could put it all in there, documentation and things. Even back in the old days, and then thinking about it in the old MMOs, even. All right, let's jump over to another one. So, did you guys know of any other video tools, Uri or Andrew? I can.
No, in particular, but I would advise against making that part of your project. You should use a service for that instead of trying to integrate like the cost of figuring out how to make it by yourself. That would be ludicrous.
Totally agree there. So
I just checked, by the way, I see it sparked a very interesting conversation in chat. It says here we're currently at 75 Fahrenheit. So.
Oh, okay. How many tomatoes was that, though? We can get that in tomato count.
Too many, again. Too many is the number for today.
And I think everyone in chat and the rest of the panel here can agree that is not hot. That's a very nice temperature. That's the lower level of suitable.
Is 75 Celsius or Fahrenheit?
Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's like what the air conditioner is set to. Right? Yeah, well, it's like set to cool down.
That's
to that.
good for you, but
earlier morning today was like 95 here, I think 92.
Yeah. Keep in mind, there's been 4 hot days in like the year in Ireland, so it's kind of like when a monster attacks, right? It doesn't matter how much damage it does; it's a surprising thing. We're not used to it. We don't know how to handle it. It's a whole big thing.
Like the snow is melting. The snow is melting. Man, no, yeah. You get used to the heat. It's weird. You get used to the cold.
Plus, as I've said before, I live in a converted. My office is a converted sort of garage area or kind of conservatory, and so the entire wall behind me that you can't see, that's the same size as this one over here, is a giant glass wall. I am in a heated box, so keep that in mind.
Like a fishbowl, so everybody can keep an eye on you.
Well, thankfully, this one faces the back of the house. Funnily enough, my previous office had the same thing, but faced the street. And so there was constantly people like knocking on my the window behind. Kids would see all of the equipment and ask if I was a YouTuber. But now nobody can see that because it faces the garden. So.
Oh, wow. So let's take Roger's question. It says, what's the best free tool to share and join a project with the team? They tried using GitHub, but they had lots of problems syncing the different types of assets. So that leads me to believe that they're not already using some source control, and they're probably just now starting to bring some people on and expand it out. What would you guys recommend for, I guess, probably source control, but also just dealing with sharing the whole project and the stuff, assuming maybe there's more than just one project worth of files too. There could be stuff outside of the project that you're trying to share and all that. So, or outside of the Unity project, I should say.
So this question is a bit loaded. There's multiple nuances, but you should probably split it into 2. There's the methodology in which you choose to share your files with others, and then there's like the way that the client that lets you interface with that methodology. So for example, the most common one is Git, and then there's GitHub for where you put everything for storage. But there's also the clients, for example, the GitHub, I think the official Git client, and then there's Git Kraken, and there's SourceTree, and other solutions like that are all available. And they all do things slightly differently. But there is one thing that goes on top of that, is that the different types of assets you work on are part of your workflow. And depending if you have a workflow that isn't fit for the assets you work with, you're going to have a lot of problems because, as an example, Unity has scenes. And if you change an object in a scene, the entire scene asset has to be synced. This means 2 people working on the same scene are changing the same asset, so they're going to have conflicts. When you are working with a Unity project with source control, you have to learn to start splitting things up so that people can work on things concurrently without conflict, which means making smaller scenes, using additive scene loading, working on different prefabs, making sure that people can work on things with the knowledge that their assets are not being worked on by others. And Unity, up to recently, had an actual tool for that with Unity Collaborate, where they would tell you if an asset is being changed by somebody else as they're doing it. So again, it's a loaded question. There's a lot of aspects you have to consider here. Anybody else?
I have a lot of opinions on this, so I want to let everyone else have their point.
Yeah, of course, the 30-minute Jason rant.
It's not really for backing up your stuff, but for the working on scenes multiple people working on a scene at a time. This app Scene Fusion, I've heard, is allows people to basically concurrently work on the same scene at the same time in different locations, and then not have problems with that. So that might solve a little bit of that issue.
Yeah, I've used this in the past. I don't know how well it works now. I haven't tried it in a long time, but I remember before it was cool. It just let you use. You could develop side by side with people. It doesn't really solve like necessarily the file sharing problem. It definitely helps a little bit when you're trying to do collaborative building, especially if you're like both working on the same level at the same time throughout the day, and not having to split that out. These kinds of things come in handy. For me, tools wise, like right now I'm generally using Plastic for stuff because it's Unity's new built-in solution, and I want to get more familiar with it. I think that Git is a pretty good option, but if you're bringing in people that are not very technically experienced, it can be difficult to get them to not screw up with Git and not make mistakes, especially if they're like super junior developers or designers or artists who haven't worked with source control before. So if you are using something like Git, make sure that you use one of the tools that makes it easier, one of the visual clients, unless they're good at learning command line tools and stuff. But again, most of the time, the problem that I see people run into with it is that like they're spending half the day trying to figure out how to fix their Git repo because they keep fucking it up because they're not familiar with it. They're not programmers. So if you're in that scenario, I'd go with something like Plastic where it's just kind of built in, or one of the other source control options. There's SVN, there's Perforce, or again, Git with a good client, and just be ready to manage it. I would not use Google Drive or OneDrive or anything else for like actual project stuff, but I would use it for sometimes source assets like Google Drive, and just dropping in source assets and asset packs and stuff into there works totally fine because you can share it. It's really fast and there's not a lot of complexity. Yeah, I think that's about it. I think Jason, it might be time for the
Right. Okay. So just to be awkward, I'm going to answer the question in a roundabout way. Big surprise. So the question was specifically about how to manage a project and share it between people. And so if we get to the heart of what that question really is saying, is like, well, we tried to do it before, but there was issues with assets. Now, it probably wasn't issues with just code, because realistically, if you're just pushing code, you're very rarely getting collision issues or problems. I'm not saying you won't, but like, unless you're literally writing the same scripts and you're overwriting exact lines, it's usually not the problem. So I guess the first thing I would say is, if you can avoid it, just don't. Like, honestly, I do a lot of contract work, and rather than every new client, I try to go and get access to their source repository and pull it down and make it build and have the right Unity version and all the stuff. We just agree on a feature, and I go and I make a thing, and I make a Unity package, and I give my Unity package like it's a bespoke asset. If you're working with somebody who doesn't need to work in the project, all the better. But if we are going to say that's not really an option for various reasons, we need, say, an artist to work on stuff, I would then pause and say the same thing. Well, hang on a second. If it's a designer or an artist, do they still need to be in the project? Can you decouple what you're talking about into, like, if you're talking about stats or systems or managing art assets or something, then honestly, it may sound silly, but it's sometimes much easier and faster to kind of what Jason was alluding to, is you can use something like Google Drive, and just like one person puts it in Google Drive and someone else is in charge of managing the master copy. They just take the files and they'll integrate it. It's obviously not as fast a workflow, but think about the alternative. Somebody tries to do that, stuff goes out of sync, and now you're losing not only 20 minutes or 30 minutes of downloading files and uploading them, you're losing a day of trying to synchronize projects and make sure builds work, and make sure, not to count the setup process of installing Unity and make sure everyone's on the same versions and all that stuff. So the first part of this is, don't if you can avoid it. If it doesn't make sense for your project, then question why you actually need everyone on the project at the same time. If that's not viable to you, then the next option is, of course, pick a solution that works. Everyone here has already said the various ones. I would have said the same thing. You know, Git is probably the one I would use in 99% of cases. But I've used Plastic, I've used Collab back when it was a thing, and the other ones as well. I will say, though, if the answer of the question, best free tool, well, to be real, the storage costs money. Somebody somewhere has to put it somewhere, and it's going to cost somebody something. And so if you're talking about sharing something co-located, someone has to pay for that. And so you're not going to find a free solution that does that unless you do it yourself. And that's one of those things where I honestly think, for the general purpose, I need 10 people on a team to have access to the same project. Git is the best solution for most people, as in it's free to use. It's got a universal solution to how it works. There's a lot of resources on how to learn it. And for all its misgivings with Unity, you can out of the box go and find Git ignores and Git attribute files and all this stuff, and a million tutorials that tell you how to set it up. You may be more likely to hit those weird issues which make you freak out and think you broke the project, but you're also more likely to find a guide that tells you how to get out of that situation than you are if you use something else. Now, to get to the cost issue, the thing about Git that a lot of people don't really realize is it's 2 phases. Git is just, there is a folder full of files. I use Git on the folder. Git makes a hidden subfolder in that folder, and it magically does things. And those magic things it does make sure that that version of the project saves versions. Now, there's the other stuff with LFS. So Git can work with large files. You just have to install a second thing, learn how to do that. And if you Google Git with Unity, I'd be amazed if someone didn't show you how to put LFS in as well, because that's kind of mandatory if you're using Unity with Git. All that being said, the bit that costs money / is the actual sharing part that you're assuming is that local version of Git that manages your local copies. If you want to put it somewhere, you have to find somewhere to put it. And the costs are going to be associated based on the size of your project and where you put it and what the allowances are. And there's so many people that will do that. There's GitHub, GitLab, so many. There's too many to count. But if that's the problem, then you don't need to use a third-party provider. And this may sound silly, but it's technically doable. You could set up Google Drive and do like a shared directory and then do something where you can synchronize your own Git repos and stuff. There are ways around this. It's not ideal, but the point of the matter is you have to make a trade-off. Do I recommend doing that? No, because like I said, it's worth putting the money into it. Having the maintenance of your project and having someone manage it for you is better if you can do that. Use Plastic, use Git, use something. Because the cost of managing and maintaining your own source pipeline on a machine or a box in the corner somewhere is probably going to be more work for you. It's not to the point where unless you actually have someone on hand who knows how to manage that server box for you, it's probably not worth it. But my point with that is simply to say it can be free if you're willing to learn how to put a box in the corner, put your Git repo up there, and then make that the source for where you send stuff to. So there's a lot of kind of facets to this, but the short answer is if you can get away with it, just don't do it. Find ways to work with a team that does not require everyone to have the exact same project, open, building, and pushing. It'll work faster. It'll be easier for you in the long run.
And I just want to add on to that excellent all-encompassing statement that as a proof, in Terraria, the artists don't actually have anything of the XNA project or the code. We actually just have the game accessible to them and the art files as they need it. And every time we make a ticket, we actually include the reference assets that we think will help them get to their goal faster. And they just draw the assets, put them back in the ticket, and we take them from the ticket and add them to the XNA project. This is in particular more important to do it that way because XNA is no longer installable properly. XNA is so old that the installer requires a service in the web that's been taken down like 2 years ago at this point. So even with the 10 years of support it had, it's no longer usable at all. So you have to hack around just to install XNA. And then there's on top of that, the content project there. We just don't bother to deal with it. We use Dropbox if we want a long-term repository of all the assets for them to access.
And they have versioning too, by the way. A lot of people don't realize that you version in those tools. So you can go back and get older version of assets in Google Drive or Dropbox or whatever as well. So you still get some of those features.
Yeah. And then, it's like, seriously, the artists just work with the art files as they intend to, and we just work with the prepared assets and the code as we need to.
There's one other level to that too, which is a little bit more kind of philosophical on top of that, but something else to note. It may seem like it's an easy line to draw between code and art. Oh, artists can work separately and just give you models, and coders will need the code or whatever. The kind of harder part is the concept of, as we said, like, people who are doing game design. Now, you're not going to get this for free, but there is a point where it's worth questioning if it's worth building a tool to assist somebody to do that outside of engine. So for example, you could have a build of a game, which is like a little tower defense game where you build towers and enemies come in and attack. Now, you could give that project to another member of the team who's designing levels for it, and they have to have the whole engine and play with it and do all of that. Or you can have a special build version of the game which has a special folder that loads in text files. And those text files register themselves as levels. And each one is just going to appear based on the level as like a debug menu. And then a designer, you can give them a completely separate tool, maybe even just make a separate Unity project or a small one or something, and literally make a paint thing, or even just some structured Photoshop thing, whatever. There's a million ways to do it. Build a thing that lets them click some buttons and say, bad guy here, wall here, stuff here, save to folder, load game. They can iterate, do as much level design as they like within the agreed contract you have, and it doesn't require any building of the project, any messing with the existing tools, and there's a cost and time investment in you making the tools for your developers to do that, but the long run, that's infinitely better. In fact, almost every big game you can think of has very custom tools for custom level editors and custom weapon and abilities and stuff. Across all large AAA titles, there's almost nobody who's using a game where everyone actually uses the same actual engine tools. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah,
and go ahead.
No, you go first. I got.
So even in Terraria, we actually have tools for the artists to iterate faster, because fast iteration is really important, and not getting to see the assets working in game is a deterrent. So when we did the resource packs update, they actually work for checking if the assets the artist made work for general purposes. So when they make a new block, for example, they can texture pack it over an existing block that they based their work on and see if it's actually working for all the purposes intended. And we also give them a debug client, and that debug client has a bunch of dev commands that let you, for example, paint blocks with your cursor, or place a bunch of liquids, or change the weather instantly. That's before we had the creative update that lets you change like anything at will with journey mode. But basically, giving people tools to work faster is very important, regardless of if you give them full project or not. Like, even the people working on the full project needs these tools.
Yeah. So I just wanted to jump back in because you're making me think of AAA stuff, Jason. And in those scenarios, number one, like what you're saying on the tools is dead on. Every game has some set of tools to do the actual design work. Like, they're not just working. Sometimes they're working in the editor too, but all of the big games are primarily, they're going to be working in some tool where they're setting up the data and doing it quickly. They're very rarely did I ever see designers or even artists doing like a build of the game or running the game in debug mode. They would almost always be running it as a build or as a custom one. We'd have like custom placer tools and there's lots of different design tools for running around the game and doing all the stuff, and they would generally be different builds. And also we have lots of repositories. We didn't just have the primary source code repository. We had repositories for artists to put all of their like experimental stuff in, to put their actual real art in. There were repositories for just experiments and stuff. And then even for design data type things that were going in there totally separately. And we'd have just the main one to pull stuff into. So yeah, I don't know. It's big topic. There's a lot of stuff, but I would say just use something. It's something cool. Oh, I also wanted to mention that Microsoft, their Azure platform, I think that along with GitLab both have unlimited free private hosting. So you can have like your Git repos up to any size, as long as they're private and the team size is small. I think it's like a limit of 3 or 5 people or something like that. I just was looking again, and it looks like Microsoft is still set to unlimited. So I was kind of surprised, but they want to lock you in and get you to use their services.
There's one other thing which is kind of like an advanced hack. Again, I don't recommend doing it, but just letting you know it's out there for people who want to get messy with it. There's a concept called symbolic links, which lets you make a folder that's linked to another folder. And it isn't a shortcut. For all intents and purposes for the operating system, it is the same folder, which is kind of a weird, trippy thing, but it basically means any contents you put in the one folder magically appear in the other. Now, Unity auto refreshes when new files gets added. So you could make a symbolic link to Unity, put the other folder somewhere else, and any files that gets dropped in there automatically get added to the matching directory in Unity. Why is that useful? Well, you can put that directory into the downloaded copy of the local version of Google Drive. So you can download Google Drive to your machine, put a folder, that folder is synced via Google Drive, that folder is then symbolically linked to Unity. You now have a folder where anyone who downloads the project puts a Google Drive directory in the same folder and puts assets in that directory will magically have their version of Unity updated with the new art assets on their version of Unity live as they're working on it. Now, again, do I recommend doing that? No, but there was a particular reason on a particular project we did that, and it works. It's just something to think about. You can do some weird
what's
stuff.
The downside why you wouldn't recommend doing that all the time?
Well, in my case, it was because you're working on something and suddenly it flashes and like Unity does the long rebuild and then all of the art changes. You're like, because somebody's working on something and updates the stuff. It worked for me, to be honest, because I was doing code stuff and I didn't care when the art changed and it didn't it didn't take that long. It's just, there's one guy in particular I work with who just loves his 4K textures and his 8K textures, and he constantly changes them. And so rather than me constantly having to pull down commits of all of these, like, oh, I've added 2 more textures, I've changed that one, I've modified this, I said, look, here's a folder, just put them in, and it'll just do it. I don't have to think about it, and I don't have to keep going back and checking that there's no weird meta collisions. I can just write code, and I'll keep getting the new visuals. And then when the time comes to upgrade the scenes, we can do that,
To add on that, why you wouldn't want to do this is because it's manual and non-reproducible. Symbolic links aren't put on your GitHub; they're local to your PC. So when you make that Google Drive,
I do not recommend it. I'm just letting you know, like there are the point of that story, I guess, was to just say there are hacks and things you can do if you're willing to like think about it and research the problem. So there's some things you can get around. Sometimes you don't just look for a specific tool. Ask yourself what problem you're solving and try to find something that works for what you're doing. But yeah, they are hacks, and you will pay the price in certain cases.
Especially if everyone was writing code, constantly saving, and your code's changing while you're writing it.
Just remember, code debt only works if you don't plan to pay the debt. I say that with Terraria being into its 11th year post.
By the way, for everybody who's with us live, I opened up the giveaway. All you got to do is choose a racing class to join in, and we'll kick that off in a bit. You can win a 1-year JetBrains rider license or a Cinti gift card to go buy whatever you want from their store. So if you want one of those, make sure that you enter before we start. I had like 1.5 billion questions here. Let's see if I can make myself the same size. There we go. That's better. So let's jump over to another one. I'll just take them in order. Start with a nice, easy one that was next up. Are you going to do code reviewing game dev show again? Like do some sort of code review? You guys up for doing that again sometime? Just reviewing somebody's project and talking it through?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm up for it.
Always fun.
Yeah, if you've got a project you'd like code reviewed, email it to me, jason@game.courses. I will share them with the guys, and then we'll pick whichever one we want to do.
I will say though. Go ahead.
Unless you guys have one already.
No, I just wanted to say that if you want to be difficult on us, then try to make a dots project. See what happens.
Yeah, please don't do that. No, I was going to say you'll have a higher chance of getting a project picked, I imagine, if rather than giving us a whole Unity project we have to deal with and build. The truth is, if it's about code questions, and that's realistically what most people are asking. Like, if you want to give us a build of a game and we can talk about it, sure. But I mean, most likely you're saying, look at my code. If that's the case, we can get really in depth and talk about like a million things on one single file. And so sending us a whole project and trying to find the points of interest is going to be harder than just if you have 2 or 3 like core systems or files that you're interested in, just send us those. And then you're more likely to get the kind of information you want, and we'll exhaustively go through it line by line. So.
All right. So is Unity a good engine for the metaverse? There are some questions about AR and stuff too. So anybody got thoughts on this? I would assume the answer to that is yes, because if you're doing metaverse stuff, you're doing AR and VR stuff, and Unity's always been good for that. But outside of that, I don't know what else to say.
Have you ever heard of that little game called VR Chat that's actually gigantic and everybody's using it? Metaverse. Unity.
That's a big yes. All right. Do you guys know any tutorials for writing a good custom render or render pipelines? Do you guys know of any good tutorials? I was actually going to go upstairs and grab the book that I just got. I'm going to pull it up and share it with you guys. I've been reading through it. I'm only on like page 20 because I read really, really slow, but it is good and it dives into that. Do you guys have any online tutorials though?
So I wanted to discuss that because specifically, while I have not tried to make a custom render pipeline, I read almost the entire documentation because I do that. And there's actually really good overview and examples of how you should do it on the official Unity documentation, and the SRP core package has its own wiki. where you can see a bunch of examples on what to do and how to interact with different elements. And it's really simple when you think about it, like after reading the overview. Because all a scriptable render pipeline is, in the end of the day, after all the magic is exhausted, is basically you just make a class with a render method. And everything you drop in there is up for your own interpretation. And you can use the URP and HDRP as a base to understand how you should construct something, or even just literally take URP and customize it to your will. Because most people that want a custom render pipeline don't actually want a custom render pipeline. They want a feature that they don't know how to implement with the current render pipeline. So they can just tack it on or hack a feature that is problematic for them. I actually have a friend who is working on a URP-based game, and that URP-based game is using a custom render pipeline just to customize the way the passes work, so they can add different rendering elements for gigantic lights with smooth shading. It's really weird and complex, and it's beyond me because I didn't see any of the code, but it looks great. So there is this one, and then there's the SRP core.
Is it in this
page.
SRP core documentation right here?
Yeah, exactly.
This one? Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely check these out. I got the book that I wanted to share up here too. I just dropped a link there. This Unity Shader Bible that just came out. I don't know if you guys have seen it. I'm still terrible with shader stuff, so it's actually a really good book for me. And it goes step by step over everything. So it seems pretty cool. It was definitely worth. Oh, it was only $26. That was definitely a good deal. Actually, I think I paid full price. It's probably on sale now because it's a #1 bestseller. Nice. Good book.
Yeah, I apparently purchased it digitally about October 26th, 2021. So.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize there was a digital one back then.
I got the audiobook version.
That's terrible.
Just
Andrew.
kidding, I didn't.
Terrible.
So it's actually on the Gitelli site, if I recall correctly. Yeah, it's there. The Unity Shaders Bible.
Oh, okay. On this one too.
Yeah, and there's also some other books here. I haven't dived deep into it, but when I did see something that's going to be in that Bible, I basically said, okay, sure, I'm buying this. I'm going to read this someday. Now, I read a lot of shader stuff, though, so...
Yeah, it's definitely a good book. There's the Amazon link again, too. It looks like it's on sale. If you want to grab that. All right, let's go over to more questions. There's like 1.5 billion. More render pipeline. Let's continue on. Planning a task. Jason, this question is for you. Do you use a particular methodology when planning a task to make it more granular and easier to implement? Do you break
Do I have to just
task?
pick one? Is it just one methodology? Or?
I don't know. I said it was for you because I figured you were going to have like 12.
Yeah.
Like,
I will say, it's again, I don't create these things. I just read a lot of books on the topics, and there's a lot of overlap. If you're reading books on self-improvement, and then you're reading books on project management, and then you're reading books on game design, and then you're reading books on project management, and all of a sudden you're noticing that they're just rephrasing like a lot of the same things under slightly different banners, there starts to see some commonalities. For example, I'm currently listening to Atomic Habits, and it's about habit forming. But the truth of the matter is, it's not really about habit forming. It's about our personal aversion to doing stuff. And so at the end of the day, the principles in that book are exactly the same as for managing these kinds of tasks. And it's the same thing. A habit is a task. You don't, then to do a task, you just have to break it down. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different strategies. I'll pick a few small ones here. I won't go. There's reasons. There's books and books and books on the topic, right? So there's a lot of things you can cover. The shortest answer is that if you don't want to do something, you are going to find every excuse not to. And we are really good at doing that. And so what you have to do is put as many things that force your brain into the structure of doing the things as you can. The first one, I say it all the time, is friction. Every one of these books will give you a different name for it, but it basically boils down to, if you can every step between you being here and starting your project on the other end, and every like path that you can give yourself where there's a possible way out along the way, you'll take it. So, oh, I passed the kitchen, there's some laundry to do. Oh, well, I guess I have to fix that before I do that thing. Or, well, I sit at my computer, I might as well check my emails first. Any little thing you can do that can block yourself, you'll take it, because it'll feel like a good excuse not to do the thing. So the first one is get rid of as many of those as you can. And so some people go really extreme where they'll put like a laptop that only has their work stuff on it, and they literally, that way it's in a different room, in a different table with a different machine, and you can only use that for work. That's kind of one end of the spectrum. The other end is just have time blocks, and like only allow yourself to work on certain things at certain times. So it's all the same thing. It's just find a way to not give yourself a way out. That's step one. Secondly, if you're managing specific, if you're going to get really specific to the question, which is how do you break project or tasks down? Well, what you want to do is, it's not just about breaking it down, it's about making it doable. That's the biggest mistake. Like if I was to say to you, you need to do X project, and you write down the tasks you have to do, that's not hard. Everyone can write down, do the thing, make it work, add the stuff. That's not going to really help you. The problem is, a version of friction that people don't see as friction is when you write down, make the health system, you've not really said what the task is. And so the minute you sit down to do it, the very first thing you do is go, I don't even know how to start making the health. And you've given yourself a way out already. It's like, that's bigger than the thing that it says on the page. It's too difficult. And so you still have that friction. So what you need to do is write down tasks in the form of exactly what you're doing. So it might be describe the features of the health system. It's like, oh, see, that I can do. I can just sit down and describe the features of the health system. And then the next task would be implement the ability to take damage. Like you have to go down smaller and smaller steps. And if you ever find yourself having a way out to step out of that, well, that's your problem. You have to find a way to have those steps be easier to do. That's the main thing. But again, there's so many of these. There's some really interesting topics related to how tasks stack with each other. So if you do something good, you'll want to do something good again. And so if you structure your tasks such that they follow something else, so habits form by pattern practicing. So if you do something like, first thing I do is check my email, and then immediately after I check my email, I write down my list of tasks for the day. Like, you're not allowed to stop the process of doing the next thing until you do that. You've already written down what you're going to do. And then now that you've written those down, you can pick your first thing, time block. At lunchtime, I spend an hour and I write what the next steps for the rest of the day are. And you kind of force yourself to do that. And then once you've done that, you can break it down further. And so it's all about these little steps and tricks. Again, loads of books on the topic. I could be here all day talking about the details. It just boils down to, when it comes to getting things done, your brain's your enemy. It's just true. It wants to stop you in every possible way it can. And if the answer is, how do I make it easier? The first step isn't about making it easier. It's about making yourself willing to do it. And then once you're willing to do it, then the trick is, how do I make it as achievable as possible? And that's usually by making it small and palatable and easy to do.
Yeah, for me, I just like to force myself into time blocks where I'm going to have something, I'm going to work on it at this time from this period and be done by some time, ideally. Like, usually what I'll do is just get up early and be like, I'm going to work on the thing that I need to do first until 8 in the morning or 9 in the morning, whatever, the first few hours of the day, only work on that, and then let myself get distracted afterwards, and just force myself to work on the most important thing, or whatever the task is that needs to be done right away.
That's the other one that's actually a very good point to highlight. There's a concept called eating the frog, which is, if you had a task list of things to do today, and one of those tasks was eat a live frog, you wouldn't want to do that. And so you're going to put that at the very end of your to-do list. And so you would do everything you can to do everything else before eating the frog. And so every other part of your day is going to be filled with that discomfort and dread of getting around to the point I eventually have to eat that frog. But if you start your day and go, it has to be done, there's no way around this, but I eat it first, everything's smoother downhill from that point. Suddenly you're more relaxed, everything's easy to do, you've gotten rid of the bad thing. And so if there's a particular task that you're dreading and you keep like skirting around the issue by redesigning your icons or like moving little pixels around the screen and going, because you don't want to write the AI thing that you know is going to eat a large portion of your time, jump into that first. Get the thing that's actually important out of the way. To get more details on that, you probably want to look into more specifically about project management and structuring your project. There's the concept of lean startup, great book on the topic, which talks about the value you're adding with the project development. And so it's not just about eating the frog for the sake of getting it over with. Is the stuff you're doing actually adding value? Like, are you, if you had limited time and limited resources and you're paying yourself, you really should be doing the thing that needs doing, not wasting your own time and money by doing all the crap around it, So that is definitely a very important point to highlight.
All right, let's take a different technical question. Maybe Yorai's got some thoughts on this one too. So this is I think out of everybody,
We all, yeah.
Using the battler as an example and each player in chat, how would you capture and store weekly stats, displaying them each week like the stats, like a scorecard? I thought that somebody had mentioned this last week, and I think it would be really cool to have like their attacks, their most picked class, all of that kind of data, and have they'd be able to see that data or see it in the stream or in the chat or something. How would you go about doing that if you're doing it, Yorai? I'm curious what yours is first.
Well, let's just start with the fact that you said data, and it's relating to the term database, because what you're doing is constructing a serialized form of everything that everybody has ever given you, so that you can make visuals out of it in the end of the day in this specific part. So if we're starting simple, literally just make a note of every text that you got from YouTube API or whatever about the users, what they've chosen. As the battles go on, make a note, this one lost to this one lost to that one. And then having all these records, you now have a concrete truth that you could probably replicate, but that's only in memory. Then you can just serialize it to anything you want. So a text file, because you don't need this backed up online. But if you want to, you can then make a web page and upload that text file as content for a content distribution network and display it as you wish, right? It's really simple in practice. It's just there's a lot of things that people look at the start and don't know how to get to the end. And it's really just about breaking it into tasks that you can do easily. So get text, figure out how to call appending all the text into one thing, then save the text to one place. And then you can do with it whatever you want. Yeah. There are ways to save text differently, and there's a bunch of formats, but ultimately they don't matter. You get what you want saved. Then there's a different part to this, which is actually capturing the information. The get the text part has nuances. And these nuances are, where do you actually detect these things? Can you actually detect these things? Does your code let you do that? There's a lot of things, for example, when we talk about setting up boundaries and an enemy taking damage, you say the ability to take damage with the health component example earlier, Jason. You can make it a method based on an interface, I take damage, and then a method take damage. And you don't know what's going on inside there. And the barrel can take damage and immediately pop because, barrels only exist to contain things in games, while an enemy can have health and defense stats, and they take a different amount of damage. So where do you put the responsibility of actually capturing this enemy took this much damage? Is it the enemy's responsibility? Is it another system's responsibility to just observe the enemy and know that a health changed, therefore he took damage? Can it be a heal that actually went negative because the enemy is undead and now they took damage from that? Where do you put those responsibilities? How do you link them all up to the one spot that knows how to save the text? This is more nuanced, but it's still very easy ultimately, because you don't need different text loggers or whatever. You can make this a singleton if you wish.
Yeah, I think you'd register for those events, and then it'd probably be the way to go. Register on those damage events, or add those in if they don't exist, and then put that all in. I like that you started off with the text file though, because I initially, in my head, I skipped right past that. I didn't even think of a text file, and I was like, well, what service would I set up? Where would I store this shit? I didn't even think about storing it locally. I just instantly went to I'll probably put it up in some service and then yeah. So that
and to be fair, you probably can, because the only step that changes is you collected the information. Where does it go? Does it go to file.write or does it go to steam.store?
Yeah, and it seems even easier to just write it locally. I could just write all that data out into a text file or into multiple text files or some little JSON structure, something fucking simple. It's not a lot of data. I mean, we're still talking tiny amounts of data, even if I ran it for a year. So it definitely could work. Yeah. So something like that.
Yeah, and also just to make a note on that, if you want to test the ability to display everything for rolled up stats and scorecards, you can actually say, instead of load, fabricate for me. I don't need to load an actual file right now. I just need data to exist. I know how I'm supposed to read them. Therefore, let me fabricate some piece of information on the fly so that I can see how it goes. And making tools to quickly test, like make the player a winner, show me how I load up a winner player, show me how I load up a player who got to the semifinals, show me if it shows the correct stats for an undead dragon or anything like that.
Jason, did you have any thoughts on a service or something too on this, or you want to go on to the next one? Or Andrew?
I have one idea.
Oh, well, then jump on it.
Oh, Google Sheets. You can send everything to Google Sheets, and then not only can it be made public so other people can see the data, but people could then manipulate it and make copies and build onto it so they can make new ways of visualizing the data and unleash the beast of the people to do crazy things with it.
Also, to add on to that, Google Sheets is actually extremely simple to paste things into. It's actually tab-separated values, and that's literally, without any complication, make a value, insert a tab into the text, and then add another value, and you can literally populate an entire thing. It's literally just tabs and enters. You can make the whole document in a single text printer inside your Unity game and press Ctrl-V, and it all goes into the sheet perfectly.
And of course, it uses CSV as well, so you can use commas instead if you wanted to. It's got a million options.
Yeah.
To answer your question of what would I add or whatever, I would say my bright brain went to exactly what Uri said. The same thing is when I heard the question, what would you do to capture and store information? I'd say I'd make a thing called stat or game event system or stats. I don't know, something. I would come up with a name and I would just say event happened or capture event, and I'd give it the thing, the actors involved, and a bit of metadata about what happened. And I wouldn't care where it goes, and I wouldn't care how it gets created. And I would test that works. Can I send it? Can I come up with off the top of my head in a little test application? Imagine one character attacked another. Imagine one character killed another. Imagine a game was won. Imagine a game was lost. Imagine a round. And can I just generate all the data so that it sends it somewhere? And then for testing, I might save that into an in-memory object and just read it and go, yeah, all of the data that I would want to display somewhere is here in a box. I can see it. And so now I can question, I've kind of done my job already. I haven't put it into all the systems and I haven't saved anywhere yet, but I made the system. Now the question becomes, where do I put it and how do I save it? And that gets to what Uri was saying about where do you put it. That's a big question in terms of how you design that system. But from my perspective, you start with, well, I've got a thing that knows how to persist event data, and I've got events happening. So my solution would be to start with, because again, you want to take this in small steps. Go to whatever the battle system or state is, make something called battle system event capturing, and then have it have a reference to the battle system, give it a reference to the thing that does the event system, and then subscribe to the events and refer them to the other thing. So now, even though you still haven't really done anything to connect anything to anything, you have a place where all the events get captured, a place where all the events get received, and then you can sit back and go, well, now what do? I don't know. And that's my first thought is text file. Because if we're just running this ourselves weekly, there's literally no reason for us to do anything more complicated. But then we might do that for 2 weeks, and then Andrew's like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if they could build charts? And you're like, okay, so now you've got a new requirement. Now you go and do that, and you build a single one file called, instead of save to text file, create a new thing called save events to Google Drive or whatever, or Google Sheets. And then you swap out the single entry to the thing that does a different service. Now it saves up there. And in fact, if you do a service like that correctly, you can read the text file you currently have, auto-upload it up to the new format for the saving to the Sheets one, read the Sheets one from now on, and then you can manage that. And then there's a whole separate question later about charts and graphs and building dynamic data and stuff, because now that you've got a system that saves data, you can save out in different formats. You can design your own JSON model. You could then send that somewhere else. You could make a web page that uses D3.js and build a 3D chart system that goes to, there's a million things you can do because each one's a separate problem. And so I guess the short answer to my additional add-on to your thing is it's not one problem. You're actually saying 6 things. You're saying, how do I capture data? 1. Same as a logger system. Look at like the 50 different logger applications out there in the world. They all do roughly the same thing. Capture the data. Step 1, how do I attach it to all my scripts? Bit of a different question. Choose a method, choose events, choose injecting a service, choose whatever makes sense for your project, separate problem. Then how do I save that data? Well, do you need to save that data? First, ask that question. Then, if I do need to save it, what format? Does it matter? What am I going to use it for? Am I going to use it for generating charts? Am I going to use it for storing and persistence? Am I going to use it for online sharing and syncing? So the short answer to that is solve each problem you have. Don't try to solve the big thing. We just talked earlier about bite-sized chunks. That is a lot of bite-sized chunks you can take. You don't need to make the system. You can make the solutions to your problems.
And I just want to append on that, that as you mentioned, making an event system, Unity's analytics actually work pretty similar to that. There's a literal Unity analytics library that has a custom event that you can literally just say analytics.custom event, name of event, then put whatever data you want in there. And there's a dashboard that lets you see all that data and pull it for whatever you want.
Actually, what's funny is when I was describing that system, and I've done this exact thing I did in a different project, that is what I used. I basically made the thing, and that's why I said draw a line. If you build a thing that's your event, that sends it to your event system called myevents.capture, my first implementation was I don't want to write a text file. I don't want to read a text file. I want to be able to see it online because analytics are easier. So I just deferred it. I just made a thing that took my event model, converted it to their event model, and then sent it up to analytics. And then I had all the benefits of the dashboard and stuff. But if I did want to change it to a text file or a JSON file, I have one line of code to do it in. So yeah, that's exactly what I actually did.
All right, I want to take a question that I assume Yorai is going to have a great answer for. This seems exactly up your alley. Before I do, though, I just wanted to tell everybody to make sure that you hit the like button, subscribe, share the stream if you haven't already, and enter the giveaway just by choosing the race class. You can watch chat, you'll see everybody else doing it. So this question was, how do AAA games deal with miscellaneous effects on the character, like burning or freezing? Do they just change the materials at runtime? You just do like material equals whatever, or how do you go about that, or what are some of the options?
So there are plenty of options here. Let's start with that. As for what the games use, changes by game, but mostly you don't want to change materials. You want to change properties on the materials. There's a thing called batching for rendering, which in simple terms, you have a shader. There are sets of fields on that shader, and switching between shaders as you render has a cost. So you don't want to do that. And you also don't want to have to bother to tell for each rendering portion, hey, use new information for this. Hey, use new information for that. So trying to minimize these costs is important for performance with AAA games in particular, because there's a bunch of objects, like literally hundreds of thousands, that could be rendering at any given point in time. So what they do is they just say, hey, here's a bunch of sets of informations, but use the same shader for all of them. Just read different spots in the bunch of information and render that. So the material properties that you have are part of what lets that happen. And then you can make effects that say, are you burning is a parameter. And if it's going up, then start to gradually
yes.
shift your character.
The answer to that question is yes, by the
way. Yeah. So using JSON as an example, the burning can be set to the smoothness value of the PBR shader, and it can make his skin all shiny. And you can also tint the color to red because this value is bespoke and you can do whatever you want with it. And you can say that a blue JSON exists and he turns purple based on a color parameter whenever he is on fire. So you can do that. There are games that will use custom shaders with certain passes, which is basically a shader is composed of different methods that are called in order. Those are the passes. And not all of the passes have to be called at any given point in time. And you can have your render pipeline or whatever have you say, hey, it's my turn to draw, and I want to draw everything that has this material, but only this one pass. And this one pass can do certain special effects for you. So I'm not sure if this is how League of Legends does it, but League of Legends has this thing where they draw copies of the character that are getting bigger over time, and they have different color specs. For example, a character flashes white, and that flash grows, or the character becomes frozen, so their entire texture gets covered by a copy of the mesh, which is with a frozen texture, or it becomes gold because there's Zonia's hourglass, which is an item that lets you be frozen in time. Also, Bard has this ability. Anyways, there are a lot of ways to render things like that, and you can set it all up with a single shader and just turn on values. And if you find that bloated, you can make passes, or you can make custom render calls for just, hey, render the object again with my own shader on top. Do whatever you have to. Switching materials is not something I recommend because it's kind of a lossy practice. By which I mean, if you forget to change it back, or if two things call, hey, change the shader, and then later change back to whatever you were, you'll end up with a situation where you start with shader A, material A, sorry. Say a coroutine calls, turn to material B for 1 second. And as you're in the middle of coroutine B that's planning to switch back to coroutine A, you're saying, hey, switch to coroutine C for 1 second. And what you'll have happen is you switch from A to B to C to A to B because you were on B when you tried to switch to C.
And I've seen this happen in projects that I've inherited from clients, where the simplest example is you have an object and it can be in the state of normal and then selected or focused and then like chosen or highlighted. So you've got this concept of like normal, focused, and selected, and you'll get people who will again run like a little animated coroutine to change the color to activate the different thing. And if you do something like bulk select objects or move selections, you get to weird scenarios sometimes where something doesn't change the previous one, and all of a sudden you've got spots of randomly like looking selected objects, and it starts to get into messy territory.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to get with here is you don't want things that are easily breakable, and changing things without keeping a copy of what the original value was is a very bad practice, because now everything that's trying to change it has to know what to come back to. So trying to add additive values on the same material and just changing those values on and off is way easier. Also, on that note, dots is freaking amazing in this regard. They let you make data components that write shader values, and with shader graph, you can set something like a shader graph's shader property to be batched. So you can draw 10,000 enemies with all the custom fields that you want, changeable extremely intuitively in dots, and they all like match it up perfectly. I've actually done that with flashing enemies in my own case. Wherever I hit an enemy, they flash white, and whenever my character gets hit, they flash red. And I'm doing like 10,000 enemies in 60 batches or something.
Andrew, what do you do for your game? Do you do this stuff in your game? I'm kind of curious now. I assume you have a very different solution if you are.
I've actually been listening and thinking, what should I do? Because I haven't done too much of this yet. The limited stuff I've done is mostly I've written a couple shaders where it, makes something emissive or make something move slightly or pulse a value, usually an emissive value or something like that. But and that can kind of give a burning effect. But that's the extent for the most part of what I've done. And actually that's why I was Uri, when you were talking, I was thinking, well, it sounds like it's better to build like a shader that does all this stuff and just use that shader. Yeah. And I was thinking, man, shaders seem scary. And so I think to a lot of people, it's like, oh, it's easier to switch a material out because you can get something on the asset store like this is that material, and you just do that. But the reality is shaders are less scary once you start getting used to them, especially with Shader Graph and Amplify Shader Editor. And so I think that's why I was thinking that, I need to do more shader stuff. And that's been something on my mind that I want to do more with blending shaders together, blending textures via shader, and not go too crazy. I am working on one shader that's for buildings and landscapes that blend stuff with vertex layers and all this other stuff, and that's almost too crazy now. But yeah, that's why I was thinking that I don't do enough of it. I should do more. Everyone should probably do more, but it can be very daunting when you just look at shaders and think, holy shit, this code is different, but you don't need to write the code anymore. So that's nice.
Yeah. So a few things here, because you brought up a lot of very good topics. The first one, yes, you should make a shader with all the features. That's actually called a concept of Uber shader, which you can literally look up on the asset store because it's really healthy.
There's literally one called an Uber shader on the asset store. Well, there's actually a few, but there's one literally named Uber shader.
Yeah, and a lot of games will want to use that because it's really good for performance. The reason being is that you don't pay the cost of shader switching, and you usually don't even have to pay the cost of like changing parameters, because a lot of stuff will have just the same parameters always. 100 rocks on your screen don't need different parameters. They can be easily batched. You don't even have to switch the shader for, let's say, the trees after. The leaves would probably want vertex movement, but you can just set a value for that.
Worth noting, because it's not intuitive at first. For again, if you're not used to this, like I wasn't, it's one thing to just think, oh, you just draw all the stuff for each thing, draw it. It doesn't work like that. There's the general concept of what you're drawing, and then the shader drawing it. There's also this thing called set pass calls and various other bits where, think of it like paintbrushes, right? You're painting something in a certain color. If you want to paint a bunch of stuff in a different color, you have to swap out your paint bucket to a different paint bucket and go through it. So if you're painting something green and you switch to the red bucket and then paint something red and switch back to the green bucket and then paint something green, they're all micro costs, but there's a lot of these costs that build up. So it's by using different shaders, even though you're just drawing the materials, you're constantly swapping your paintbrushes all the time just to do each of these different sets of phases. There's a lot of really complicated stuff that goes into that. And so to Yora's point on batching, like batching as a concept is just universally worth kind of looking into. And it's not just the mesh batching like we were talking about earlier, and it's not just this stuff. Another example is something like particles. You don't think of it that way, but if you have a particle system, that's a simulated system that builds particles. And I have another particle system that's a simulated system that builds particles. If I have one particle system, the particle system can emit at multiple locations. So you can basically have 6 things that have a certain effect, and you can emit at all of the places. And so it emits once from the simulation rather than running each of the simulations. So it's similar stuff, but there's just a lot of this stuff. There's lots of this. So just look into it as the general idea of how do I have passes of things effectively is the point.
Yeah, and to answer Archangel's question about Unity shader graph, if you'll do something like a subgraph with a parameter to activate, yes, that's an approach. That said, activate can be a bit more nuanced. For example, if a character gets disintegrated, what does disintegration mean? Do you have a value that lets you animate over time how fast the character gets disintegrated? How do you make that happen? There are a lot of ways to do it. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, if Jason is on fire can be a question of yes or no, but it can also be a slider. How much on fire are you? Is the value necessarily clumped to 0 and 1? Can the value have 2 ways? Is it being on fire can be, are you on red fire or are you on green fire? You can pack that into a single question of information like a vector 2. There's a lot of little small things that are very fun with that.
Do you guys want to go to this next question about beginner development and shaders?
Sure. Nobody should be afraid from making shaders. Open up Shader Graph right now. Make a shader. Be happy for a day.
Yeah, I was actually fun. I was going to say something very similar, which is if this was pre-shader graph, I would say run away hard, and run away fast. But we live in a world now where there's just nice shader graphs, and so you can honestly like find a YouTuber and say how to disintegrate shader and just follow it, and it's just nodes, and it's you can visually see each step changing, and it's you can kind of get a handle on what's going on. So for someone like me who's not very shader friendly, I found it very easy these days. Like now, if I haven't, for the most part, if there's something I want to do, I just look at it on YouTube and somebody has a tutorial to get you halfway there, and then you can just play find the node, where you just start searching through available things and dragging things into things and trying to see how you can get what you want out of it. And so the more you play with it, the more you understand the toolbox. If you're learning Unity for the first time now, honestly, you can just put it alongside all the other stuff you're learning. It's no more complicated now than trying to figure out the input system or rigid bodies for the first time or understanding quaternions. It's about the same level as that. But if you were writing your own original shaders in code, different story.
And on that note, regarding this integration, I actually shared an example with you that shows how easily you can get a disintegration going. Weimann, if you can open that up for a moment, or I guess not.
Just a second. It's opening. Okay. Just take a second.
Yeah. So, 1 second.
That one right there.
Yeah. So just with this, you can literally say, I want a character to disintegrate over time, and you can take this as a mask that says, with just these 3 nodes, these areas are going to get removed over time from the character. I can paint whatever I want from the value of black and white to say black and red, or nothing and red, as I wish. It's that simple these days. You literally just have to say, make a slider, make a simple noise, and make a step node, connect them, and you're done. Do not be afraid of shaders. Try them right now. You won't regret it.
Nice. That definitely looks simple.
Yeah, and the stuff you can do with it, like once you start getting of those things, you just build up.
Double down.
Yeah.
This is something that, based on that code that was effectively pointed to me by Yora, I made this thing, which is, you can see it's just doing that. It's doing the exact same thing that you're seeing there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to be fair, there's a lot of stuff that you can add on to it, but it's that simple to start. And you can do a lot just from combining simple things. There's this one thing that a lot of people like, force fields or shields that are made of energy. And that's literally one node called the Fresnel node.
That's looking cool. Let's see.
Yeah.
Andrew, did you have something on that?
No, just, I mean, it was looking cool. Jason did a little bit more there, it looked like, with colliders and other things, so that's cool. Yeah, it's just impressive.
Principally speaking, it is basically just that with that. Yeah.
Well, that I think that's one of those things. It's similar, when we talk about AI and we say, oh, simple AI, just do a few simple things combined, and it looks like this extravagant, super smart AI system. Shaders can be very similar, just like particles even. And combine the two, of course. You just throw in a few simple things, and suddenly you have this really interesting thing that people would look at and be like, holy shit, that's amazing. How'd you do that? And it's just like, oh, a couple nodes I got from a YouTube tutorial.
So, Andrew, you said particle when my mouse was over a particle question, so I clicked on it instinctively. Nice. You want to answer this one? Is there a way to let a particle system trigger a collision?
I believe each particle can trigger a collision itself. Yeah.
Oh, basically a checkbox.
So there's actually a few nuances to that. Surprise, surprise. So the Unity Classic particle system does have a checkbox for collision, and there's actually settings for quality of that collision. And there's actually an on-particle collision Unity event that you can have in mono behaviors to detect whenever there's a collision. And that's all done on the CPU. But if you're using VFX Graph, the newer particle system running on the GPU, it actually isn't there, because there is a difference in how they work, and it's fundamental because one of them is running on the GPU. And necessarily, some of that stuff is not available for you if it's off screen. So use with caution, as they say. Standard particle system is way better for it, though you sometimes wouldn't even want to use particle systems for your collision, because now you're giving something that's meant to be only visual gameplay effects.
Yeah, it's worth noting that. So this is a whole separate thing that it's kind of worth looking into. There is a book I've talked about before called Nature of Code, and the YouTube channel Coding Train. And if you follow that series, you kind of learn that the concept of particle is just a thing with a position, and it looks a certain way. And so conceptually speaking, it's really straightforward as to what a particle is. And what that means is you can actually do quite a lot with it. For example, I think, I don't think Peer Play does it, but there's a different, maybe you'll know which one I'm talking about, Yora, but there's a particular asset store developer who creates tons of really cool particle-based stuff, who has a YouTube channel where they do tutorials on how they do some of
that. Something like that.
Unreal, and the reason I bring that up is to say that there's an example where they you can get the array of the particles, and then for each particle position, and you can do stuff. Now, I'm not saying it's a performant option, but at a very base level, if you iterated all the particles and then had a sphere collider or something, you can do whatever you want with it. Again, not saying but just philosophically, think about it as it's not that complicated in terms of what that's doing. There's a lot of really fun stuff you can do. And if you want to, you can hunt down a really old tutorial by Matt Shell, who's now over on 1000 Ant, another YouTube channel you should check out, where they do a gun that's a particle gun, sort of think Splatoon style stuff where you spray particles. And what they wanted was when you spray the wall with particles and the particle hits the wall, it would drip other particles that would hit the ground and then cause other splatters. And so on collision of that, spawn other particle system. On that other particle system, on collision from there, drop a thing on the floor. And so that's basically the same thing. It's shooting the collisions, and it's surprisingly simple to have something which looks really interesting, like a paint dripping gun that drops other paint strokes, you know?
Yeah, so if you look at the asset store page Jason just opened, this is Gabriel's asset store. And everything that he makes here, I think, has also a YouTube video showing how he made it. The assets are actually more fine-tuned after the video tutorial ends, but you can see how to go step by step. And it's really simpler than it looks, and it's amazing. So very worth a watch. Also, we kind of glossed over it when we were talking about shader, but you should go watch Freya Holmer's entire YouTube channel regarding understanding shaders. There's like hours worth of content there if you really want to dive into that.
Yeah, I've actually been meaning to ask him if he'd come on the show sometime and talk about particle stuff. Is him chatting all the time in Discord, so I gotta hit him up.
Awesome.
Sorry, I was getting a little bit too comfortable enjoying the conversation. I was like laying down, getting cozy. It's definitely nice. Let's see. Let's go on to another question real quick. Ooh, this is one that came in earlier, but I'm not sure because I know the answer to this and it's complicated, but I'm really curious about what the reasoning for it is too. So the question was, can you generate new scripts at runtime, attach them to a game object, and then delete them? So I guess before we dive into the more complicated part, attaching scripts at runtime that already exist is super simple. If that's something you want to do, you can just do add component. You can call that at runtime, and you can do its remove component to remove them. So you can just add and remove them. But if you want to do a brand new script where you're generating C# code like outside of the game, importing it into the game somehow, and then adding it, or maybe like your user is typing in C# code for a mono behavior and attaching it, that is possible but dramatically more complicated. Anybody want to talk about that at all?
Where do we begin? So as you said, making scripts that already exist be attached to game objects, extremely easy. It's literally just add component, the type of mono behavior, you're done. You have a reference to the component already from that one method. Set whatever values you want. It will be executed the next frame. Easy peasy. That said, if the script doesn't exist, you're going to have to construct it somehow. And when you have to construct something, there are a lot of black magic doors that start showing themselves to you saying, pick me, pick me. I'm going to say something very simple here. Figure out all the behaviors you want, make a big script that can run through all of them, or a rule engine that can construct rules that will execute whatever you need, pre-constructed, assembled at runtime, and then just slap that on your game objects instead. If you really must, then there is a way to create a method and make it run at runtime, usually based on reflection. There are assets for it. It will not work on specific platforms that prevent just-in-time compiling. So be mindful of that. Not recommended at all, not efficient at all, but doable. This is way too advanced to the point that if you're asking about this, you already should be Googling and already knowing what to do. So we really shouldn't dive into those. But to touch more on the idea of create ahead of time, assemble at runtime, that's actually something that a lot of graph solutions do, specifically behavior trees and other things like even a finite state machine can be constructed at runtime and execute code as it sees fit. Jason, do you want to take this from here?
Yeah. So you're kind of describing at the moment the general idea of a rule engine, and so it's worth noting that there's so many tiers to this and how you'd solve it. The short answer is very similar to what we said earlier with the Unity projects. If you can avoid it, just don't do it. The truth of the matter is you probably don't actually need to write code at runtime. What you probably want is to have a bucket of behaviors. In fact, to be really brutally honest, Unity is what's called a component design pattern or a component model. It's designed to be components. And if your game is about building things by composing stuff, think Scribblenauts, you just need a floatable and damageable, and you just stack the things together and compose your new objects out of it. If you're trying to do it because you're trying to build some interesting behavior, then you can, have pre-existing scripts of configuration data you can alter. If you can't do that and you want to have it more plug-inable, the next solution still isn't code generation. It's create a contract interface for finding some way of injecting the code. And so you basically build a thing called get behavior and have like an AI which has some like wandering behavior or thinking behavior, and you create an interface called get wonder behavior, and you would make a DLL out of that, and you would distribute that to other people, and then they would make a different DLL that uses that one, conforms to that contract, and then you can read assemblies in memory to load that in and then run that code. So that's an even easier way, but you have to pre-structure your contract to what you're going to do. The next step is you can generate the code, but if you are going to do that, you end up using something like, I linked one there, a video, Jason. This is a video by World of Zero, another great channel, which is talking about embedding the actual Roslyn compiler inside of Unity. And so you can write actual scripts and have it compile into things and use them. It's, in his example, he's using it as an editor tool for doing some fun searching and testing and automating some stuff. Not putting it in a game because that would be insane. But the point is, it is doable. It's just C# at the end of the day. I don't recommend it. I'm just letting you know that that's a thing that can be done. The short answer is, to go all the way back to what we're saying, is this is a glorified form of tool development. If you're doing this because you want people to be able to do dynamic things in your project, you're better off building that contract first. There's a concept called DSLs, or domain-specific languages. That's where you basically say, if you want to have someone write code at runtime, don't have them write real code, have a fake language. And you can build something called a grammar, and that's easier to do. It's basically a graph or a tree with nodes, and the nodes build a language. Because you don't really think about this, how a compiler actually compiles your code is using a parser and a lexer. And the way that actually works is it's like math operations. It goes through each set and go, oh, that's an addition, oh, that's a keyword, and it builds what's called an expression out of it. And you can find tools to do that. Still complicated, still probably way too more than you need. But if you are going down this road, the better solution is to find out how to build your own lexer and parser, build your own DSL language, and long story short, you end up with a script where someone can write in a unique language that's unique to your game that might be move to level, go to place, add weapon, equip thing. And it's like a custom language that's parsed and treated like a language. You can put math operators in there. You can even do complicated stuff with brackets. You can literally take something like Lua and rebuild that in a structure into your game. And that will give you a lot of the flexibility you want, but it's still, at the end of the day, just running your code in a tree structure somewhere. And that's infinitely simpler than trying to run the compiler. Separately from all of this, we haven't even talked about security. You don't want people running arbitrary code in your application. You just don't want that happening for multiple reasons.
And to just touch on the simplicity of it all, if you think it's difficult, try and play a game like Dreams because that one lets you literally see how visual scripting is done out of the data. It's literally a visualized form of, here is a node that takes in something, does something, and generating code can be done by parsing a piece of whatever to become a set of nodes to say, take this, take that, combine them, do something based on the decision if it's above a value or below a value, etc.
Are you guys ready for another question? We've got
Definitely.
a lot of them still here, so I figure we take at least a few more before I start this giveaway. Hey guys, thanks for the quality of the show. Do you have any point of view about NFTs in the gaming industry and how they are used? We've been asked this a bunch of times, but that was all before NFTs and crypto stuff all collapsed. So I thought it might be fun to pop it up again. Does anybody want to jump in? I mean, I can share my thought on it, which was just that I've never been convinced that there was value for game developers for NFTs. I've heard arguments for game players, but none that convinced me as a game developer that there was value in me putting them into my game. They weren't going to add anything that I couldn't already do, and it was just kind of relinquishing control for money, like speculative money only. But now that they've all plummeted, I think that the view of them is probably much less optimistic, and more people are kind of in that same mindset. If you guys had any thoughts about the NFT stuff that's happened recently, or NFTs in games?
I do. So I've got a few thoughts. So I think first of all, NFTs clearly a money grab, people just trying to make money. That's all it was. That's all it was. It's whatever you want to call it. It's in-app purchases on steroids, just people trying to make quick money. A lot of people made some quick money. They essentially took it from other people. It's like reverse Robin Hood. And it's just it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. There's a lot of, there's the stories of people using that somebody made $70 million off of Malber's dragons and other things. They just made crappy Pokemon type stuff from the asset store and made millions and millions. It's like, good for them, but that just created a whole other
21-year-old.
Yeah, a bunch of other people saying I can do that too. And the reality is, yeah, maybe you can. Most people can't though. A lot of people tried to make NFT stuff and lost their money because it costs money to mint them and do all this other crap. That being said, NFTs are the first version of something that I think there will be multiple versions of, and eventually it won't be NFTs, but there will be some method of buying and selling digital things that makes some sense. I don't think it's going to be people buying, digital art for their digital wall. I think there's going to be some other method of value that people get out of it that's more concrete, more utilitarian. I think it has to be utilitarian to be long-term. Otherwise, it's just speculation, and people are going to get burned enough where they're going to say, screw this. Virtual shoes, sorry, Meta. Virtual shoes are not valuable at all, especially not at the same price of regular shoes, which is what a lot of big players like Meta want to do. I think long term we're going to have some mixture of, metaverse type stuff where people buy and sell digital things similar to physical things. But the reality is it's going to be very different. The method is not going to be NFTs. It's going to be something different. And it's probably going to be much more centralized, which luckily is more stable and trustworthy for whatever it's worth, I think. And in the end, it's not going to look at all like what it looks like today. And I have no idea what it's going to look like. I just know it's not going to be what it is today.
I just want to point out that there is one case where buying shoes virtually is actually more costly than buying shoes physically. And that's if you're buying assets to use in your products, because those are things that you're going to pay an artist way longer time. So buy assets on the asset store to save time. It's an economic concept that can be worthwhile if you don't have a dedicated team for it.
Absolutely.
I'm going to restrain my answer to specifically NFTs in games. So that's the line we're going to talk about here. And for that, we're going to go on a small detour adventure. So I want to talk about the N64 briefly. So on the N64, Rare was one of the big publishers of games. And one of the games they made was Banjo-Kazooie. Great game, one of my favorites. I have the physical box over there, 2 copies actually for different reasons. And that game was great. And at the time, Rare had a really interesting idea where they wanted to create something called Stop and Swap. And Stop and Swap was the idea that you could, because the way the memory buffer worked on the N64 is there was about 10 seconds where it would retain information from the stored game, even when you take the cartridge out. And so what you could do is you could play the game and do something and grab some unlocks or something. And then you could, say, take out Banjo-Kazooie and put in Donkey Kong 64, and it would retain those memory sections for what the game was doing, and you would then be able to get unlockables that are unique between the 2 games if you have both cartridges, which is kind of interesting. And so to this day, there's a key behind a glass wall in Banjo-Kazooie that doesn't do anything, and you can never get to it. And it was the bane of my childhood existence because it was for a feature that never got completed, because to this day, Banjo-Kazooie is the only game that does it. There is also tie-ins. The code for doing it in Donkey Kong exists, but it's not turned on. People have hacked it. You can see online examples, but it doesn't work. Now, why did I bring all of that up? Because the problem that Rare was solving was sharing information between 2 games. The N64 has memory cartridges. There we go. So I guess my point is, what NFTs are promising for games is to have storefronts and to buy things and to keep track of who owns them and a lot of other things. And something tells me we've played a few games that have some of those features already. So personally, when it comes to the question of NFTs in games, you have to tell me what they add that doesn't currently exist. And right now, all they add is a lot of cost in terms of managing the minting and the complications that deal with adding more blockchain entries to make changes to values. If I was being tasked with building a system like this for a game, I would be like, we'll just have a database, we'll store a user account and some keys, and we get everything that you're describing in a system that is well structured, has web services online that work, and there's no need to do it. So the truth of the matter is, if you hear NFTs in games, it's often NFTs are cool, games are cool. How do I get that? Can we find a way to? And that's not a good reason to use them. That's my opinion.
Yeah. I find usually it's NFTs are cool and they gave us $5 million to add them to the game. So here's the NFTs in the game.
Yeah. I feel like, to Jason, to your point of swapping stuff between games, that's kind of the promise, I think, for a more of a utilitarian angle, getting rid of the get rich quick stuff, which it's all that. But if you take away the getting rich quick, then the idea that you can buy a sword in Fortnite and then, if the other game allows it, use that same sword in some other game.
Yeah, but see the asterisk there. Again, as a developer who makes systems for companies, the fact that you have to say if the other game allows it means that could be an API. That could just be an API call.
Exactly.
Already, you can have exactly the same feature. But
that's why I mean, whatever the future is going to be, it's not going to be NFTs. It's not going to be like some special magical thing that, only I own. No, Apple and Google, they can all work together to build some system that we all recognize that, oh, no, you own that thing. I mean, we buy movies from these services already, and you buy a license. You don't actually own the movie. You own the license. If Apple shuts down their service, you lost your entire library. But, that's the same scenario. But if they all work together, and if there's a value for the player to where the game developers want to add that into integration, because really, why would Fortnite want to let you export the stuff you buy from their game? It seems like that's a good way to lose players, unless there's like a monetary thing, transaction fee. So when you take it out, they get paid. There's got to be some reason for the developers, monetarily to do this. But I think the promise is Ready Player One style stuff, that I can buy something, I can craft something, I can make something, and then I can use this in any single game. It's going to be tough, though, because every big player, including Unreal, they're going to do this with Fortnite. I guarantee you Meta's doing this already. They want to be what's the Ready Player One, the world, the Oasis. Everyone wants to be, all the big players want to be the Oasis, and they want to make that a walled garden. Now, they'll say that it's open or whatever, but no, they're going to control every transaction because that's where they're going to make all the money. And that's where it's going to be challenging, making that a system where there isn't one Oasis, but rather any number. And it's all, that part's open so that anyone can build their own version of that just plays nicely with everything else. It's very complicated, I think.
Yeah, like again, there's no reason for a company to want to do that, as you said. I think Fortnite is the perfect example. Let's be honest. If you were to tell me 15 years ago there would be a game that would have characters from Cobra Kai right next to the Matrix characters with, Toy Story characters and all the various stuff all in a game together, you're like, how would they get the license for that? That's insane. That wouldn't happen. There's no way. No game could get away with that. It's already happened. I mean, that's the world we live in now. But if you've gotten that power, you're not giving that up, and you're not giving other people your games, right? And even if you did, you've no idea how much money has gone into licensing agreements to make that happen. And that's for one game. If you were to then be able to take that and put it in another game, that other game would have to go through the same entire list of, you need to pay to use our licensing for all this stuff. And so the other game wouldn't just be getting the stuff that you bought for free. They have to pay for your use of that other thing in their game, which why would they want to do that? If you could have any one of 100 different characters you bought in a different game, and it's going to cost them hundreds of different licenses of millions a piece to support the characters you bought in a different game, like, they're not going to do it. There's no reason for them to do it.
Yeah, there has to be a brand new licensing structure. that's automated.
Just to cut in here,
Yeah.
it could be just that the value of your NFT or whatever token gets reinterpreted differently. So while it could be a legendary weapon from a crossover in one game, it could be generic item number 25 in another game. That's like there's a very important distinction between what actual data is there and how it's interpreted by the game.
I mean,
something very important.
You bring up a very good point there, and a problem really. If a sword's a legendary item in one game and does all this badass stuff, and then I bring it over to
it might be
game,
a weak weapon in the other one. Yeah,
yeah,
do nothing
that's not cool. That's not fun. I don't want that item now. So the reality is that when you have a sword in one thing or any item, it has to be the same item in another thing. Now, maybe there's slight changes, or rather, it acts differently due to inherent changes in the world you're in. But I'm not going to buy a gun that's crazy powerful only to find out that it only works in one tiny game that someone made on Roblox and it doesn't work in any other game I play. Why would I spend money on that? So there has to be some shared understanding of utility and what a thing does.
That's why you're almost destined to be like cosmetic only, like because you have an impossible task of turning it into something that you could use in games. Because we're already having trouble with balancing in games. Imagine trying to do that where someone could start a game new, they've been playing another game for 7 years, and they just import their god armor of stuff. It's like, well, you can't. That's what kind of game is that? You know?
Yeah. Unless it's all on the same platform. So we're all playing Fortnite, and Fortnite is no longer Fortnite. It's just the thing we all play. But we're not playing Fortnite. I'm playing this thing. It just runs on Fortnite. So there's that shared language. And then the shared value, and then some system to take that things of high value and basically tax them so that if you want to use them, there's going to be an ongoing cost to using them, which of course encourages you to use them in a way that gets you the value. And every time that there's a transaction, they get a small cut and they become the new government of this.
And even like philosophical, forget about all this stuff, even if it's possible, even if all of the magic wands were waved and it was possible. Let me ask you a very genuine, serious question here. I don't know about you, but I did try playing Fortnite, and it's a good game. It's well made, and I bought Marcus Phoenix because he looked cool as a character. So I've been through the process, but I won't deny that it's just cynical references to stuff. At the end of the day, just because I can fly in on a Matrix robot as Marcus Phoenix, it's cool, and the novelty will wear off pretty soon. But it's not an integration; it is a reference.
Yeah.
And now compare that to something like Terraria, where when they do references to other games, it's not references, it's a reimagining of the thing in another thing. It's how do we take the spirit of this and put it in somewhere else? I don't want a world where things can just be, you know what, oh, that exists over here, we'll just drop it over here and we'll pay lip service to it by rendering the same model. I want a world where if you do want two games to have an intersection of some kind, you have to actually take care to integrate it. Like Nier Automata, or Nier series in general, does the rounds. It's integrated in a lot of things, but you know what? It's usually done well. A lot of games care enough to start putting in the characters. The characters have different abilities and things and different stuff. Even Overwatch had the Heroes of the Storm characters moved to that game, but they weren't just drop character in. They were, how do they fit in this world, reimagined as a concept. And that takes work and time. And so that's like, you can't just pass an ID. And I just can't imagine a world where even if we got the store your unique reference, at best it would be a license key to unlock the same equivalent character in the other thing, at which case now you just have a Ubisoft account with a marker on your account saying you bought the character that can be integrated. There's still no reason to do this. And if the argument is it's freedom, or the company can't delete it, or I said, well, I hate to break it to you, but that's not how anything works. There's already, I think 70% of all NFTs don't link to what they originally linked to. Like, that's already the case. Or not, it's just like, even separately from all of that, truth is that's just not how the world works. Like, you don't think about it, but you don't own your Steam games. If Steam shut down tomorrow, they don't technically have to give you anything. I think they have written it into their stuff that they will, and there's various things that whatever, but the truth is they don't have to. Like, you've never, in the original documentation that you signed without realizing it did say you're renting from us, we're storing stuff, like we can take it away. So that's just the way the world works. Like, this is never, I just don't see this happening. Even if it did, it would be less consumer positive. You think it's cool because you'll get lots of extra stuff, but what'll actually happen is you'll democratize content creation. So it makes more sense for content creators and game developers to crap out 50 character models than to actually make something, because it's so much easier. And even if only a few people buy them, they've already made more money than they would paying a couple of artists than to build a game system that integrates a character with new abilities.
Yeah.
That world that you have the NFT powered gaming industry is worse, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you touched on then character or content creation. The reality is that it's more fun to create your own. And if we're talking about, it always comes down to the kids, right? What are the cool kids doing? The cool kids are playing Fortnite right now, and they're getting scammed out of their parents' money right now, and it's such a psychological gambit. But that's what the cool kids are doing. In the end, the cool kids like the IP because they there's all this Spider-Man and all that stuff, and that's what's making money. But in a world that, when people think about the metaverse and AR and walking down the street with your virtual clothes on or whatever that only other people with their special glasses can see, in that scenario, if that were to come to pass, I don't think the cool kids will want what everybody else has. They're going to create their own stuff. So you're going to come into Unity or some other content creation platform, create your own particles so that when you're walking around the mall and other cool kids with their cool glasses can see your particles, they're unique to you. They're something that you created and you modified, and it's going to be a bunch of kids just modding particles and other systems and shaders and stuff in Unity and other systems to be unique and rather than buying stuff.
Yeah, I mean Roblox, just ... There you go.
Yeah,
right? It's the entire the universe of content creation is getting bigger. People are getting more into the concept of making things, and while IPs are cool, the best I ever see this happening, the closest to this idea I ever see happening, is a game that's basically PlayStation Dreams, but it's using licensed things. That's the best I ever see. You play a game where you have a toolbox, and the toolbox includes, the Marty's hoverboard, and you can drag it into your game, and then you can use those, but there's no illusion that you own it. It's that this game is including licenses that maybe you can buy the ability to add that to your project, and then people can load into your level or your game and play with the toys that you have purchased to be supported in your levels. That I could see happening, but yeah, not the image that's sold,
Yeah. And in the end, you flashed up the question that hinted at owning, quote unquote, owning a digital thing and proof of ownership so you can then sell that. I don't think people really care. iTunes and all the others, we rent, we subscribe, we don't care to own things anymore. And I think a lot of us have nostalgia, especially someone like Jason's story with their boxes of things in the back. And that's cool because we grew up with that. But the kids not growing up with that, they're not going to give a shit about owning that thing because it's like IKEA. You're going to get rid of it in a year. And so why do you care to own something that will have zero value when nobody else wants it?
Especially when these days, like, you start buying games in boxes and you open it and there's a fucking CD key to get it on Steam. Like, it's not even the game. You're buying a piece of art, which is fine. But if you're going to do that, just sell me the art, not this fake box for a fake thing. It's infuriating.
I am going to disagree on the notion that people don't care about the ownership of things, but I am going to focus more on the NFT aspect of it, where even if you own the ownership via a token, there needs to be an application for you to load that token in to say, yeah, sure, you can keep going, go play. And that, like anything else, is just as vulnerable to regular piracy. And on top of that, you're going to need a spot that distributes it. And as we covered very early on in this stream, distribution isn't free. Somebody has to host the files. If there's not going to be anybody that distributes the app, there's not going to be anywhere that you can use your token of ownership to say, I'm going to play. And the app needs to be able to connect to whatever shows it the token, which is also an aspect that can fail and fall flat forever. And if you are going to argue that the token itself should be the app, that's a problem of vulnerability itself, because everything about the tokens is visible to everybody, which is how they work. So you can take a token that contains an app, cut out the token verification bit, and you just have the app, and you can load it. So this entire concept falls apart unless there's a benevolent being that distributes all assets of all apps forever for you to consume, and the place that manages the tokens never falls apart.
And again, like, this isn't new. Like, back in my day, you'd go into a store and you'd buy a game and you'd have it and you'd play it and you'd go online. And then, like recently, Ubisoft announcing 15 games where they're turning off all the online services. I have my physical NFT right here in a disc form where I've bought the game, but if I plug it in and there's nobody online and no service to connect to, it doesn't fucking matter. So, at the end of the day, NFT may give you your unique instant license to your thing, but if that thing doesn't resolve, and then the thing that resolves doesn't have a game service that's running that uses the thing, all of this nonsense doesn't matter. It's all downstream and it's all relying on chains of services and systems. It's pointless.
Yeah.
So on that topic of old games, this question came up about how to find who owns old IPs. Do you guys happen to know any way to do that, other than just Googling and searching? Is there like a site out there?
Yes.
I'm asking whoever is an expert on this instead.
Yeah.
I've seen some YouTubers do it to try to hunt down things, and the general solution tends to be find when the company went defunct, find who owned the company in terms of their parent company, and then find out who the president or the senior developer, and just email them. That tends to be what happens if someone is genuinely interested in finding out to buy it or something. But yeah, there's not like a public registry of what happened to an IP. At least there is there is some IPs, but not for all of them. You're not going to find what you're looking for, I guess, if you're just trying to figure out who owns it. And even if you did, a lot of them are in nebulous states. Like people think of it as just like, oh, I've given it to you, you have the IP. Doesn't work like that. There's often scenarios where a game is actually split in two, and some companies own the IP to like the protagonist, but other people own the IP to the particular game name or the game instance that you're trying to do. And so you could make the game but not have the character in it. Or there's so many like nuances to this because companies tend to get they get resolved. The company gets dissolved, mixed into another company. Some games companies will make a game, sell it to somebody like Microsoft or whatever, then the game never gets made, and then they'll try and buy back their old license, and you get into these weird. There's so many interesting stories about licenses being bounced around for older games, so you'd have a hard time finding out that kind of stuff.
Gotta talk to people, huh? Yorai, did you want to take the question about Terraria? I was curious. It doesn't have to be the biggest secret. Is there the biggest secret that you can reveal safely?
Okay, so let's start off with secrets are secrets. If you're telling them, they're no longer a secret. So that's out of the window. That said, duct tape. How much duct tape do you think it needs to have before you're saying it's not just duct tape with things on top of it? Because the main class and the world gen class and the player class and the NPC class and the projectile class, for some reason I counted 4. I think I said 5. But there's a lot of code in Terraria, and a lot of it is really specialized for specific pieces of content, and there's no magic there. It's all ifs and elses. The game, if I had to tout something that counts as a secret, is that the game doesn't care about the quality of the code as much as it cares about the quality for the players. We will write the most elegant system ever, but then if it doesn't feel as good, we'll start hacking it to the seams just to make it feel fantastic. Nobody cares how your code looks behind the theater stage. There is absolutely no reason to prioritize how your code looks if it's not going to make a product that evokes good feelings and in the end of the day delivers the goals that you've set for it. That said, when you hack, you accumulate the concept of tech debt, which is when you put something that breaks the rules somewhere, now somebody has to manage the mind cost of knowing it exists and knowing that you have to maintain it. And if anything changes, that probably will collapse. So you have to maintain it along with everything else. You're doubling down the amount of code that you have to maintain, and that scales linearly. So it's not going to be that bad percentages wise every time it happens, but it does still slow you down every single time. It also happens with features without any tech debt, where you just want to add something. So for the sake of cohesiveness, all the other features have to interact with the new feature you've just added. But the short gist is, be mindful that the more you try to specialize your content, the longer that content lasts, the more time that you're going to have to pay to maintain it later. So do undo your hacks at a certain point. Figure out how you want the system to feel well, then clean the code so that you can keep working without paying those costs in the future. which is something that is extremely difficult depending on what you're trying to do.
Now, on that, when do you like to go about undoing the hacks? Like, do you do that as early as possible, or is it when you get some downtime, or when you're interacting with that system again, or what's the cleanup?
The cleanup usually is we get to a point where it feels great, and then we see how can we clean it up. So that would be how it was always was effectively. Like, here is a system with 50 hacks that say I am feeling great, and then I'm turning those 50 hacks into a cohesive feature that isn't a hack, and I'm saying, okay, this code looks clean, it works as we wanted it, we're good to stop here. Now, ideally, you'll do this as soon as you got to that good point, because everything is still in your mind. You still know exactly how all these hacks work, and you know how you can unhack them. If you leave that alone for 3 weeks to a month, it's going to be way more difficult, because now future you is going to have to guess what past you was thinking when he was setting a certain value to 999 for whatever the reason is.
That makes a lot of sense. I like to try to do the unhacking early too, but occasionally I find that I do it. I don't get around to it, and then I get to it when I start to reuse that system. I'm like, oh crap, I need to unhack this thing before I start making it worse. Like, hacking on top of hacks is what scares me.
Yeah. On that note, I think Terraria has like one particular hack where that hack just kept on growing and growing and growing, and I think it has like more than 10 layers of hacks now, and nobody knows exactly how it works. So whenever we have to debug it, we're just trying to add more hacks to make sure it works how we want it, and we're just leaving it alone beyond that. But again, the game is meant to feel good, and it does deliver on that, and this is the metric that we care for above all else. So
all right, we got a question that I don't have an answer to. Now that Jason's back, maybe one of you guys will know. It's a career question from James about tech art. It says, I'm an immersive tech artist about to finish my PhD and deciding whether to go into gaming. The PhD is gaming related, but didn't study games. So finding it hard to do the transition. So I don't know what the deciding between going into gaming and what the alternatives are for immersive tech artists. I assume there are some other media and entertainment stuff out there, but I don't really know the landscape well enough to really talk about it. Do you guys have thoughts about this? Like how to get in if you're not really into gaming, but you're into the tech art side? I wish
so first off, I'm not even sure on the terminology, but I assume that immersive tech artist means VR and AR specifically, or am I wrong on that? Because I think it's pretty important to understand what we're actually talking about.
That's a good question. I didn't make that connection. Possibly.
Yeah. So to answer that a bit more concretely, gaming industry is pretty big right now. That said, all tech industry is pretty big. Depending on the jobs that you feel like you'll enjoy more, because the transition isn't really that much about. How do I explain this? When you work on games, you might have some more limitations on what you can actually deliver because of performance targets. The game devices are pretty weak, and your tasks may be oriented towards making people feel better. Therefore, you're not allowed to have hijinks. Whereas something more scientific is allowed to have it as long as you get the important bits done. And you might have stronger devices that allow for it. So this is literally the only part that's going to be a big point of consideration. Do you enjoy working with constraints, or do you enjoy working on something that's less constrained but might have more specific consideration? Do you care about the feel, or do you care about doing interesting things that are potentially very complex? The things that feel well, obviously being the games. The things that being more complex would be scientific, tech, probably healthcare related, like visualizing internal organs or whatever. Assuming I'm getting the immersive tech artist part right.
I think you are based on my quick searching, but it's hard to tell.
Yeah. So just to help you choose, figure out if you care about the constraints or not. if you have a problem with the constraints or not, and then that would probably help nudge you in a single direction. Other than that, I don't have good advice because I don't know what you mean exactly with immersive tech art.
So, Jason, are you reverse aging?
No, I'm just getting better at using cameras, right? It's the magic of understanding how all this stuff works, you know.
Yeah, using cameras, and then off cameras doing a lot of work to look like a movie star.
Yeah, your makeup artist, right on the other side over there, getting you.
I don't think you've realized. So I changed my lighting setup, so I now have a light that's this size. Just up there.
You showed me the picture of that thing. So, everybody should see that. The light is like the size of my desk.
Yeah. So that helps. Once you start understanding how to do soft lighting and what it does, it helps, you know.
Yeah.
You were saying you should have got the mini on that one, right?
Yeah. Thankfully, I also had a lantern as well. I switched to that. But yeah, the light I originally got was so big that it took up it couldn't fit in the office, so I had to change it.
Also, to add on to that,
out the power in Ireland.
Also, to add on to that, you aren't zooming out, right? You're just becoming smaller.
Bit of both, yeah. I will say again, like, jokes aside, we talked about the arm the last day. One of the benefits from Jason Weimann suggesting that to me was I can play with angles and stuff. Previously, I was kind of limited to having a tripod on the far end of my bloody office, and I couldn't do much with it. And so it's kind of a pain trying to frame yourself and do stuff if you don't have an easy way to do it without all of that. So being able to just try out a few different angles and find something I like and set a good you know, choose a good angle for the lens and stuff. There's lots of fun stuff, you know.
Yeah, it's
like,
really
what
nice.
A lot of people don't realize is the millimeter of the lens actually affects how you look. So this is a whole. If you ever want to get into like deep photography stuff, bloggers will use 30, 40, 50 millimeter, and it has this real close, engaging look to it. But what it does is it literally widens your face because of the way the perspective of the angle works. But if you go to about 100 or 120, that's what professional photographers use. And that's why the camera tends to be so far away when you're doing portrait style photo stuff, because it shrinks the frame and makes it look more natural. So humans' eyes would be looking at that roughly at about 120 millimeter. But for this stuff, you're used to the big in your face YouTuber style. So literally what you choose will directly change the shape of your face exclusively from the angle. And that's got nothing to do with the separate like lighting solutions, which can make someone look older or not based on how dark a scene is. And like that, even just having the light on one side change drastically changes mood and make things look darker. And then, as Yoroi mentioned earlier, there's LUTs and there's color balances and big topic.
Yeah.
Now you make me play with my camera.
And
also, I did.
To the same
I previously had the big beard, and I shaved it, so there's that too. That's just like a very literal weight change of beard, you know. So
yeah,
I just like to have mine in wide mode. It does make my face much wider, though. It's weird. Like it looks different. It's hard to tell though in this little tiny view. But I like to set it up with the screen right there too. So I'll move the camera around and get the shot perfect and see it right there. It's yeah.
So one thing I'm missing. Awesome. I don't have a nice way to see the screen. I can share it and I can watch it in OBS, but I don't have like a monitor that I want to set up. And the other thing is I have the Podcaster teleprompter. And one thing you can do, which is really cool, is you don't have to use it as a teleprompter. I can take a spare phone and I can slot it under my camera there, and I can treat it as a second monitor, and I can have all of you on that, which would then project onto the lens, and I could then be looking directly down the lens and during the talk, and then have other stuff on the second screen. There's lots of cool stuff I could do, but some of it's just too much work.
This is that arm you're talking about, by the way, for everybody that was curious. I linked it in chat. You can see I purchased it 2 times. I've got 2 of them.
I kind of want to get a second one myself.
Yeah, it's great. And being able to just hot swap it back and forth. I mean, I wouldn't mind having a second camera set up, but just being able to move it back and forth between the 2 arms really easily is great. You just hit a little button in it and it pops over. So yeah, definitely good hardware. And that's another one of those things, I think, on the point you were making earlier about getting rid of barriers and making it as easy as possible to get stuff done. It doesn't just apply on the code side. Like I do that for the reason I have all that stuff set up like that is for the video editing side of it to make it as easy as possible too. And the teleprompter stuff, just like you got, it helps a lot. So you want to get rid of those barriers, make it as simple as possible to get productive, I guess. I think I want to kick off the giveaway in just a second, but somebody mentioned that the link to the mega bundle in the description doesn't work. I didn't realize that. I'm going to have to check that out. Did you guys grab that mega bundle, by the way? I got it yesterday so that I could pull in the bugs. Here, let me pull them over real quick. So the insects here, the ladybug and stuff, the ladybug and this caterpillar dude is making them into characters in my little tile top game. So I saw that was on the pack and I had to grab it. I was like, oh, those are like a cool little theme too. I figured I'm going to make like a different army from each different asset pack. It'd probably be like a different publisher for each team and do like 4 or 5 different armies of totally different characters. Have fun with it.
Then the people who like the assets more will start rallying in.
Just to show you, by the way, because you're talking about the lights, this isn't the big one that I showed you. This is what I currently have set up. And because you're talking about friction, something to point out is this is also mounted to my monitor now, or mounted to my desk. So this, and it's hard to see scale there, but for context, that's like a 45-inch monitor corner you're seeing there. So you can kind of get a sense of how big that light is. And that's also part of the heat.
45-inch monitor?
Yeah, that's kind of why I'm melting. So yeah, you can kind of get a sense of how big. And that's the small one. The other light was considerably larger than that one. So.
Oh, I like it on the screen in my background, though. It looks nice and bright.
Yeah.
So I pull up that bundle too. Where's that one at?
Yeah. So regarding that bundle, I actually didn't bother picking it up because I already own more than half of it. I do have some nice opinions about most of the assets here. Specifically, I love how Crest Ocean looks, and the In Control asset has been proved time and time again to be absolutely fantastic. Especially
a lot of games you already own that are in Unity are using it. Like I can, as someone who's gone and decompiled quite a lot of Unity games, In Control is actually the most common input system I found.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm finding it everywhere that I don't expect.
I used it.
There you go, another one. Just to point out, as a practice, trying to see how other games work is a really good way to become more informed about what you didn't know that you don't know. And with modding, it's just generally great fun. There's a lot of modding sites these days, and modding is becoming pretty big across games. Some supported officially. So I do recommend everybody give it a shot if you're not averse to that kind of exploration without hand-holding.
Updating my bundle link right now. There we go. And saved.
Also, to call it out, the lava and volcano environment are pretty fantastic to see. Like, I'm literally drooling about how the emission works in that one. But that's just like the nature of being high quality detail, right?
Yeah, that one's really cool. Pal was talking about that last week. And then that's actually how I found out that this pack existed, because I didn't realize it was a separate bundle. I was thinking it was the same as the procedural world sale.
There is this
bugs that I got. I saw them on here. I bought them because I bought the pack because of my bugs, and now I don't see them on here. Am I blind?
Cartoon insect characters from the 35 portion.
Yeah, where is it?
Go up. Okay. The 35.
Oh, it's too high up. Okay, yeah, this one. Yeah, these guys were super cool. I just want to pop up. This was the one that convinced me. It was I think when I saw this little clip, I was like, yeah, I'll get it.
Yeah, they're definitely making it into the battle, right?
Yeah, like these guys, look, they have battle animations and stuff. They did like little spin kicks and stuff. Come on, do some moves. Let me see. Lots of animations. Get to fighting. Yeah, they just look cool. Like I said, and for the deal, like I had to jump on it. All right. So I think I want to kick off the giveaway real quick. let the battler start. If you wanted to enter to win a Cinti gift card or a JetBrains Rider 1-year license, I'll let the winner, first place winner pick. Second place will get the other prize. All you have to do is choose a race and a class, type them into chat. You'll pop up on here in just a minute, and then we'll kick off the giveaway, and it'll be running in the background behind us. But you can see the Unity window for it here, and scale it up a little bit. It kind of fits. Maybe I'll do a full screen share in a little bit to show it. But you got about a minute, and then I'll kick that off, and then the winner will get something awesome, or whichever awesome thing they prefer. So, what do you think of Soul Link? What's Soul Link? Anybody know what that is?
It was one of the assets there.
It's like a procedural AI thing. Yeah.
Oh, I missed it.
I've not tried it, so I can't vouch it.
Same. I wasn't aware of its existence until it was brought up. I don't generally try to go for bespoke spawner assets because I think that's something that's like very specific to each kind of project that you're working on, and depending on what you want, until you know you want a specific thing, don't even bother looking for a solution for a problem you don't have.
Especially with one exception I will say that's kind of fun is sometimes I'll buy ones that just have like organic animal behaviors, like badgers or something that you wouldn't even put in your game if you're doing it yourself. But if someone's got like rats that run around, or like it's a really great one that has birds and they have spawn landing points and things. I've dropped that in so many projects because like it doesn't need it, but it's a very easy addition, and it adds a lot of life when birds are like circling and landing on things. So sometimes if it's just like an add-on thing, can be quite nice. Or you can just look at the AI they've made and use it for interesting inspiration, because there's a couple of assets which have done a really good job of making natural looking animal behaviors, like how an animal forages, which I wouldn't even know where to begin on designing that, because it's not just about the animation and it's not just about the behavior. You have to make it forage and find and do stuff. Yeah, and if someone's gone and done that, you're not really paying for the AI per se. You're paying for someone has put the polish into that organic look. So sometimes I've like dropped in characters because the character just looks good as an animal that I wouldn't put the effort in myself.
Yeah, but being very clear here, game design also matters, and if you're relying on an asset that you don't understand to design the game balance for you, you're going to be in for a pinch later. So
yeah, I would like literally exclusively use it for sort of like if you're making a shooter game and you want to have some animals that are there that you could shoot or scare off that have no impact on the gameplay, that adds value but doesn't impact your balance, then fine. Stuff like that I'd probably add.
All right, so I'm going to kick off the giveaway real quick. Everybody who's entered can win, and everybody who hasn't can come back next week and try again. So it'll go, and I'll just leave this kind of running in the background. Continue on, but I want to make sure that we see at least one round of characters running out, make sure everything's working. And I think that after that discussion earlier about setting up stat tracking and all that, like I am very heavily convinced to do it, especially now that Yorai made me think of doing it locally and I can just save it into a text file. It's going to take me an hour, not a day like I was thinking. So I think I might do that even as just a live stream or something this week, just to make sure that I get it done so we can have stats for who wins, what characters are the best, what ones are the worst.
And yes. And honestly, just for fun, I do recommend, because it's like 4 lines of code, also add Unity Analytics and just send it there and like just learn how to send a packet, because then you'll be able to see the charts and graphs and they'll aggregate stuff. It'll have a lot of useless information to you, like regions of stuff and launching, because you're only launching it locally, but you'll get a lot of like aggregated stuff for, like if you sent battles won and characters and stuff, it would be a fun way to have a dashboard you could look at.
That's a really good idea.
Literally just make a singleton called game events, call every tracking event you want from that, game events.track whatever, and then from that singleton reroute all the writing down to Unity Analytics.
And it's literally Unity Analytics.dispatch event. It's like one line thing, and you then create a new event and send it to it, and that's it.
Yeah, it's literally within the same line. You're literally just making a new class in the argument that you're passing in. String class done.
To disappoint you, Ed, I've only worked on the Battler twice, and it was the health bars for the most part. I haven't done much on it at all. This is
be
definitely
honest,
Jason
all
Weimann's
of it.
baby.
Yeah, but still, I haven't worked on it that much either. It's very little. It got up and running. It just kind of works, and for the most part, just add in random little things here and there, like new characters and stuff, or new art. But I would like to put in a little bit of work on it, or maybe turn it into something completely different where people could.
It would be a cool tutorial series to like have a feature that we could add to it, and then go over the decisions we're making to add it. Because and I really want to be clear with this. I think it's fair to say I don't normally shill for courses and things. I'll mention people I like and content I've consumed. So it's not like I'm shilling for stuff I don't like. I want to say truthfully, I take all the courses, all of them. If someone has an online course in Unity, I'll take it. Doesn't matter. From Code Monkeys to Thomas Brushes to all the ones in the middle, taking all of those. And I say, if the discussions we've been talking about, how do you step through and problem solve in an iterative way? My favorite video series on that I've ever seen is Jason Weimann's, because he specifically in his most recent game architecture series, one thing that's in that video series that's not in anyone else's I've seen is exactly that, where we start with a piece of paper and go, I want to add this feature in Trello, and then iterate your way to a small version, add it to source control in iterative bytes, and then do the next bit. So if that philosophy is interesting to you, I do genuinely recommend that course.
No, thanks. Yeah, that was kind of the goal. It was really trying to be less of the like this is the exact ideal world scenario, and more of the this is how you would actually real world do it. Because I feel like I've done a lot of stuff where like the ideal scenario is cool and all, but I never fall into that, and I never know exactly how it's supposed to tie in. So I was oh, thanks. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, no, it's like, because that's the thing is I think as somebody, because I take courses for two reasons. One, I do want to learn what works and what doesn't. So someday I might make one and make a good one. But the other side of it is just I that's how I always learned, from Pluralsight all the way up. And I bring it up because when we're talking about the systems, I think one of the valuable things I'm noticing that people are curious about is that problem solving, because it's very easy to go from, I've seen tutorials that show me how to make a thing, I've heard how to do it, and that bridge, the gap can be quite difficult to go from how do you, quite frankly, project manage feature additions. And your course, that one is the only one I've seen do that, so it might be something to tease as a video of. Maybe we can do like an introductory one with the battler where we pick a feature and we go through that sort of process to kind of hint at what that system would be like.
Oh, nice. So Ed mentioned that he was actually trying to ask me the question, apparently. I don't have a playlist of them, but I think there are 2 streams up there existing, and I'll probably do another one. Maybe I'll just make a playlist of the 3. But I think if you just search for YouTube in my channel, you'll find it. And there was a question about how the integration works with the stream and the battler. And it's actually amazingly simple. There's an API for YouTube and Google to just read the chat, and it parses every 10 seconds. It looks for all the new chat messages. It does a quick comparison to see if anybody said any of the words that match a race and class, just by doing like I think it's literally a string.contains on each one. It's not optimized at all because it doesn't need to be. And then it just spawns a character for them. And if the character already exists, it finds them by the name. It just has a dictionary of the characters by name, and then it just updates their race and class choice. So it's really
there
really
is one issue with it which I would love to fix someday if I ever got time, which is it's doing a string contains, as you said, which I noticed even separately from the code, like just seeing how it responds to the chat. Mm-hmm. If you had something like cat and someone wrote a word with cat in the middle of their word, it would pick cat in a separate message. So you might pick your character and then later on in a different conversation talk about the word catalog or something, and you'll get cat replaced on your thing because they're overwrite. Yeah, so that's one thing that I'd love to fix, where it's like uniquely checks for like a regex experiment. Maybe even we choose a thing like an asterisk or an exclamation mark as a dedicated.
There's actually a mode in there for that, for the exact matches. But oh no, that was only exact matched if they didn't put extra text in at all. So they put in just race.
To be sure, this is why Twitch does exclamation mark blank, right? That's their default behavior, because you want to make sure that it's a registered.
It's obvious it's a command, and that's probably what it should do, is just change it over to be something like that, right? Just be commands, especially if we start giving them the ability to see their own stats and all that, and have the bot chat back into YouTube and all that. But it's really straightforward to use the code. I was surprised how easy it was.
You know, I have this thing where everything I'm looking at these days, I'm thinking, can I do this in dots? Can I do that in dots? Can I do this in dots? And I'm thinking earlier, you said maybe you should make something completely different. And I was about to scream, make that the same game, but in dots. And I'm like,
It wouldn't be completely different though. That would be the same.
yeah, but you're going to run it at 165 FPS, and there's going to be more units and particles around.
but my restream window is still gonna freeze up and get like 2 frames a second. So hopefully everybody can still see the battle back behind me at least when it freezes. I think I've realized it freezes when I do a screen share, but not, I think, a window share. And I don't know why. It might be because my screens are mirrored and they're different resolutions and it's just fucking up. But I don't know. Yeah, 68 people left. Oh, it says it freezes unless it's highlighted. Interesting. I wonder what the cost of that is. Does it care about capital letters? No, not at all. It's totally case insensitive. Generally, that's one thing that I try to do is make everything case insensitive all the time.
Yeah, it's good practice in general. In Terraria, we have this bestiary where you can see all the enemies that you fight, and there is a search bar. And if you try to type any name of an enemy, even if it's a portion of it, as Jason mentioned a bit earlier when we tried to find words, we are going to find the term in the middle of an enemy's name. So one thing that's pretty clever is that you can write space and then a letter, and if you know like Eye of Cthulhu, then you can write space C, and it's going to find everything of Cthulhu because there's a space in the middle. And to make it easier, we cast everything to lowercase as we search. Like prior to the search, all the search terms are already lowercase, and then we just take your text, lowercase it, and search by that. But one other interesting thing is we add aliases to search terms. So the game has a lot of enemies, and people aren't going to write full names because full names are also easy to typo. So we have a system that lets us add any alias we want to any enemy. So common community things like Eater of Worlds is usually written as EOW, and we just add that as an alias, and we can use that whenever. And those are also localized. It's a pretty fun system.
So it's funny. I went on a huge research thing on this a couple of years ago. And all of the different ways that people have done text, fuzzy searching, all of this, it's just such a fascinating topic. And I used to use for myself the classic string compare. And by the way, if you're ever doing string compares, don't use string double equals string. Use dot equals, and specifically thing dot equals other thing, comma, and you can pass in options. And one of the options is ordinal ignore case, and that does the case ignore for you. So don't do thing dot to lower equals thing dot to lower. Just don't do that. Anyway, just separate from that, after all the research I did, and I like Levenstein distance was the one I used for a long time. It's very cool. It has a lot of value to it because what it does is it tells you how many steps would it take to change word A to word B, and so that helps you find misspelled words. So if you meant to write door but you wrote DORO, I'd be able to pattern match that because the number of step changes is quite small. But I didn't find that was very useful as a search tool because it's useful to find mistakes, but it's not how people tend to type. What's better is I found an article written by the creators of Sublime Text, the text editor that I used to use before VS Code. And they have that exact kind of system where, similar to Writer or anything else, if you've got something with the greatest blank, you can just type TG whatever, and it will capture each space representing a new word, and it would do a pattern match search for it. So I now have a little bucket full of various search algorithms that I've used. And the one I'm using is funny enough, I talked about Flow Launcher before, which is the tool I use to search my computer and whatever. They're using their own implementation of that same stuff learned from the same article from the same Sublime Text stuff a long time ago. And it's really good. It's a nice organic search thing that is it feels natural because it does that pattern match across. And their one actually is even better because it includes a match array, which lets you highlight a string with the match characters it finds as you do the search. It's very cool. There's a lot of So searching text and fuzzy searches is a very interesting topic.
All right, we got a couple more questions and see if we can hit a few of them before we run out of time. This one came up earlier, and I don't know. I've never done a drag and shoot type of game before, so I'm having a hard time kind of conceptualizing it. But I was curious if you guys have done something like this or have thoughts on it. So I'm doing a drag and shoot basketball game, but my ball is always thrown in one direction and it doesn't go the way the camera's facing. How can I solve it? And I mean, it seems like kind of a question where we'd need more detail. But how would you build a drag and shoot basketball game?
Like, I've had this error so many times on different. It's in fact one of these. An error just like this is one of the first errors I ever hit in Unity, which was when I was building a fireball throwing thing in VR, and every time I threw something, it would only go. I'd say, "Oh, this works fine," but if I turned here and throw it, it would throw that way again too. And I'm like, I don't. What's going? And I figured out that. Well, yeah. So basically, the idea is there's two things that could be wrong here. One of them is there's a misunderstanding that when you write vector3 forward or thing.forward, that they don't all really mean the same thing, because vector3 forward is like the world space forward as opposed to the forward relative to the object space. So there's world and local. That's one possible issue. The second one is when you have a character controller and you've got a camera, like this character might be facing forward and that shoots forward. And even if you rotate them, they will still shoot forward. But if your camera's here, they're going to shoot forward relative to them, not relative to the camera. So what you might have to do is there's a way of projecting through the camera. So you can project a plane through the camera and then alter your direction. And that's how games with character controllers do it, so that when you press forward, regardless of where the character is, they'll move away from the camera. So it's probably one of those two. It's either world to local is wrong for you, or more likely the description you're saying is that when you swipe, you're capturing a just general spaced vector movement, but you're only applying it as a forward onto the object, which is only going to fire its forward, not forward relative through to the camera where you'd want to project it through. So have a look at Unity projecting through camera, or if you're having trouble with that, find a character controller and like do vague Google searches, like make character move with camera or from camera, and you'll find a guide. Like so many YouTubers have done this, where they've done the basic version, then the camera, and then the project through camera code. It's only like 2 lines, but you have to just learn how to use it.
There's also the nuance where, depending on how your game looks, if you are already doing cameras and raycasts, understand what you're actually casting against. Because there are games where you will think, oh, I'll just cast a ray to that point farther away, and that's going to be always totally accurate because it will hit the air somewhere. And people don't understand that there is no concept of hitting air. You can hit planes. And there is an entire way to do that, but you have to understand that there is a difference. So know what you are scanning against. Now, in terms of actually making a system like this for people who haven't done it before, you literally just detect when a touch starts, where a touch ends. You get the difference between the points, the end and the start, and you know this is the way you want to go. You can turn that into a direction, and then you can make something use that direction to do whatever. In this case, add velocity to be shot at this direction. You can also reinterpret it. So even if you get the point in screen space for the camera, you can convert it to, say, portion of screen space, then just a direction, then just the ball compared to the basketball in XY axis, and then project that for whatever you want. Like, you can do any amount of complex things with this, but in the end of the day, you're just getting a difference and turning it into something that pushes an object.
Yeah.
The bugs will only be there.
Just double check and make sure that your code isn't just setting the rotation and not the velocity correctly. You could be setting the rotation correctly and forgetting to set the velocity correctly and not launching it in its forward rotation. I've seen that happen before too, where like it's rotated right, but it's moving the wrong way because it just didn't remember to make the connection there.
And that's a good point too. You're mentioning that if it is a physical ball using like a rigid body and it's rolling, you want to make sure you are actually using an add force, because it's not just a matter of moving forward. There's angular velocity, and if you're swiping, you actually want to capture whatever angle of swipe you're doing. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. I just want to
go ahead.
Yeah. So Archangel asked, how about using busier curves for the trajectory? You may want to throw a straight or a volley. On that note, physics don't work with Bezier curves. What you do have is accumulation of acceleration and velocity, and gravity is a type of, it's a wrong term to use, but it's basically going to, it's an acceleration downwards as far as games are concerned. And whenever you shoot something up, that acceleration is what's going to get it forward. As for determining how to shoot so that you can do a straight or a volley, that's a matter of doing physics calculations, depending on a very simple kinematic formula of V0t plus GT t divided by 2, which is basically going to give you the starting velocity that you need, given the time that you have, so that you can reach a certain amount of distance, and you can use that to figure out and customize how things should go. I actually use this a lot when I determine how far a character I have should jump. There's these games that let you, like character controllers, I say this everywhere, where they give you a field for how much force does a jump have, and that's not intuitive. Nobody cares about how much force you have. You don't know how that translates to whatever you have. What if you have lower gravity than the base thing this concept imagines? So if you just want a jump that's 2 meters tall, you can use that equation to figure out what type of velocity you would force you would actually have to apply to get a jump that gets you this height. It's incredibly simple. It's 3 lines of code, and they're not even long.
Although, just to note, if it is, that is one thing hitting a ball, but if you wanted to, for example, have not just the dotted trajectory line, but you wanted to like simulate where something would land at the end properly and it's physics based, it's going to cost you performance. But what you can do is you can just literally run the simulation once before as they're like moving, and then find the settled position and then put your fake rendering thing there. So you can actually just run the simulation of the exact what will happen, just don't show it to the player. It's not ideal, but it can work if it's a small experience and you want to make sure that it will correctly predict where it's going to hit, knock a bunch of things over, land, roll, and land safely. You can just literally run it once, and then if they let go at that point, it will do it for real. You know,
I ran into this challenge of predicting trajectory with arrows a couple weeks ago, and I never got quite solved. I was having an issue where I was able to predict to some degree, but the further away I was, the more I would overshoot. The arrow would overshoot, and then someone at my day job, I was talking to them, and they said, "Oh, but when you figure out the angle that you need to shoot it at, you're actually changing the initial velocity." I guess math. I don't know. I don't understand that part of it, but that did make sense to where, oh yeah, the higher the angle, if that also increases the velocity, the initial velocity, then it would overshoot, even though, because I was choosing the angle based on a fixed velocity.
Yeah, well, if you want, again, it is complicated, but a very basic example, if I said to you, here's a ball, throw it with a certain amount of force, and you want to hit into a basket and you'd land it, if you tilted your hand up further and you wanted to hit the same, that same amount of force isn't going to land in the same location, right? You do have to apply more force to get there. So yeah, you have to calculate that in as part of your trajectory. That's why you tend to do it backwards. Like you can shuffle the parameters of that equation, and you tend to work it back and figure out how much you usually want to say to land here, how much force over how much time would I have to do to get it from this point, and then you sort of reverse it back and fire it that way.
Angle.
Just to add on that, if you do have enough force to do it even at the farther shot going up, you can actually just shoot it straight. It's going to get there faster. It's just going to end up at a different angle when it does that.
To your point, Archangel, yes, that's true. But like I said, that's if you're either doing a trajectory or a single jump. If I have a tower full of blocks and a ball hits the tower and the blocks fall, and then the ball knocks a few of the blocks, rolls, and then lands somewhere, to get the prediction of where that landing is going to be, no amount of estimating trajectory is going to give me that, right? It'll tell me where it'll hit the first time, but it won't tell me after the physics is settled, after objects of X mass has been hit and landed and bounced and velocities have changed. So you have to simulate it if you want to simulate the state of a world after an action, not just the state of a trajectory throw.
Oh, we had a winner for the giveaway. I just want to say congrats to Midnight Oil and Thought Drifter win a JetBrains rider license. So I'll let the first place winner decide which one they want, a rider license or a $50 Cinti card to go grab whatever one of these packs you want. So congrats again, and thanks to both of them for donating stuff for us to give away. I'm going to close that out now. And do you guys want to take a couple more questions?
Sure.
We've got there are a few here, and I don't know if we have enough time to optimize them all. How about let's go into command pattern one. For optimization, is an object pool for command objects the only way when you expect to create lots of commands per frame? So if you're generating tons and tons of commands, do you pool them and reuse them, or do you still just instantiate them, or what's the solution? For in this example is replay and fighting game. So
if you're talking about optimization, commands are probably not something that usually ties into that at all. To be more clear, if you're really going to the nitty-gritty and you need every ounce of performance, you are not going to want to have objects that live anywhere in memory, and you're going to be hopping between them just to simulate them. That said, fighting games aren't that kind of big about performance, because there's not much going on there. It's just about being able to do a lot at once, which is the resimulation. You could have a pool, as you mentioned. Yes, it's not the only way, but it is a way that lets you at least easily understand what was going on, which is a very big difference between what you actually need. Because you can, in a raw manner, say, I know that on this frame, this projectile spawned instead of, I know that on this frame, the player clicked this. There's a very big difference between the two. One of them has to figure out what actually happens when a player clicks, call out events, and the other one just can use a projectile, set it on, set it off at the position, etc. And for the sake of being truly useful for resimulation in a fighting game, you want just the inputs and the characters being given to you. But there is a lot of nuance to that. There is actually a great talk. I don't remember who it was. There is like a 40-minute video on YouTube regarding fighting games and resimulation and how they decided whether to resimulate certain aspects of the fighting game and not resimulate them. So, for example, particles don't want to replay or audio doesn't want to replay. I think it was on GDC. You really should look up like the term fighting in GDC and see what you have there.
Yeah, because as you're kind of alluding to, in general, it's the outcome that matters. And so oftentimes the visual representation can be entirely just resimulated in a way that doesn't, well, replayed in a way that doesn't affect things. They do this in networked games all of the time, where you can throw a bomb and the trajectory and the angle might land and hit and everything matches the same, but the correct array of particles will be different. A good example of this for me is in Overwatch, you've got characters like Roadhog. Roadhog fires his gun, it's a scrap gun, and the gun he fires is a particle system, and the particle system hits the wall in all these shapes. When he fires in the network, he's not sending particles, and nobody knows what they look like. And if you do watch two players side by side, the exact configuration of those particles will be very different, but the calculations will be the same, because that's not what you're sending. But I was going to say, specifically on the question of optimization on the last one, it depends what you're optimizing for. So this has got nothing to do with the fighting one specifically, but just keep in mind when you say optimization, like if you're trying to optimize for playback, that's one thing. But another thing, you might be optimizing for memory, storage, and space or whatever. For example, you might want to compare, like are you storing the whole thing and replaying it back? Are you storing the inputs and resimulating? And if you are storing the inputs and resimulating, are you storing all the inputs or using your own compression to do it? For example, if someone presses up, 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 left, 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 you can just say whatever, up 4, L2. And so in memory, you're storing a compressed representation of that entire sequence of inputs. And so there's like, what are you optimizing for? It's not just a matter of like that'll be slower to read back because you now have to decompress it back to the inputs and then rebuild the stuff back. But if your bandwidth limitation at the time of designing the system is we're storing so much of this, we want to get as much of it in memory as possible and we can reload it back later, then that might be more important to you. So you have to know what you're actually optimizing for.
Yeah. Just to answer the question about that's in chat right now regarding Sky Shark's 8 frames in 16 ms. Yes, that one. It's fantastic. It's totally worth a listen to. And on top of that, I think there is an open GitHub project regarding a rollback simulation for fighting games. It might be worth to take a look at that as well. I don't remember its name, but it's going to show up like everywhere if you look it up. I think it's like a really hot topic regarding fighting games and programming.
So I got Andrew's character pack running in my background. It's a good video to have up there.
Also, on the topic of curiosity, on the resimulation stuff, Photon Fusion apparently has a resimulation solution, and it's tick-based. So they built an entire thing in Unity that lets you like cache certain things and have them resimulated for you based on the synchronized information, and that's fantastic. Everybody should give that a shot.
Yeah, that statement about Unity being non-deterministic, that's bitten me in the ass many times. And in fact, actually, back when Chronos, the asset from was Too Big, when they Ludig, their asset Chronos, it's really cool and it was really visually impressive. But if you rewound, like it would let you rewind and do all sorts of stuff. But if you specifically rewound physics like halfway during, like you fired a bullet and then rewound back halfway and let go, it wouldn't fire the same way again for exactly that reason. Like you could rewind it back to before it was fired and then fire a different bullet. If you were to try to like simulate a partial way through, you would get those issues, and it was infuriating.
So here's a question about another Unity system. I'm building a story-based game, trying a linear one. Like if you grab something, things get triggered. But they're looking at using timeline as their way to build it. And I don't know about you guys, but my initial inclination is to say that that's probably not a good option. And there's probably like an asset pack that just does linear story-based games much cleaner and easier without making it difficult. I find timeline good for smaller scale.
There's entire systems on the asset store where they've got the door opening, the item pickups, the rotate in your hand. If that's the kind of game you're going for, you can get 3/4 of that out of the box immediately with an asset.
I agree on the notion of using specialized asset to do what you want, but using timeline is perfectly fine within the constraints of you understanding what timeline actually does for you. You're not supposed to use timeline for branching decisions. You're just using timeline to show a timeline of stuff.
Although technically you can use it for branching decisions. You can get away with it. It's
but it's a hack. It's a hack. Timeline is supposed to be a linear thing without any choices in it. But you can make smaller timelines that do specific things. So for example, as you pick up a brush, you can make a dresser move and show an open door and then turn on a light. That's a timeline thing. That's perfectly fine to have. Animated objects at random, changing the state that they have.
A common example that we've used many, many times on client projects has been if you were to do the whole thing like walk up to a cabinet and open it, you could just play an animation and then try to sync things up, or you just start a timeline at that moment and you can control everything. You can have the character reach the hand at the right place, open the cupboard, play the sounds, move the camera in a fun way, and then when you're done, have the camera reset back, and that sequences the timeline. So it effectively is like a miniature movie at set pieces for doing those actions. That's a really cool way to do it because you can have a lot of creative design control.
Yeah, and if they're all isolated, you can have that for every kind of thing. Like in a kitchen, if you go to the fridge, the character will have their hand open the refrigerator, take out a bowl of milk, drink from it or whatever, put it back, close the fridge. And if you open the freezer, it's its own timeline doing the same stuff, but different. And the point is that timelines are not supposed to be splitting logic for you. They're only supposed to be there for the animations of what you want. They can help you trigger logic. Don't let that logic trigger other timelines because you're going to end up with a web of things beyond your control.
What I've used it kind of extensively for is what you can do with timeline is you can choose systems that you'd want to explore to a designer, but not have it be complicated. A great example is we had one system where there was character emotions in a narrative thing. So you have a bunch of characters interacting in a narrative sequence. I built a custom timeline track that lets you basically just drag a track and say mood, happy or sad or whatever, and assign a color to it and crossfade them and blend them. And then I in code had access to a value that would tell me what moods are they blending between. And then we did stuff like played audio that matched or changed colors and stuff. So the designer could design that system, but we just use it as a way of reading that sequential data for me to use it in a more complicated way in the code. So you can use it for that sort of stuff, but that's obviously not really dynamic. It's just more moving the decision out of the code, letting the designer treat it like a custom dev tool. And so that's, speaking of tools earlier, that's a really good example. There's so many times we'll just use timeline to build custom tools because it's a really useful way to have a designer design a timeline, and then I can take bits of data out of that to do fun stuff with.
There was a recommendation for an asset too. I just wanted to mention it. I linked it down below for Storyteller. I haven't used it, but it seems like a couple people in chat seem to like it, so might check it out and experiment with it. Have you guys seen this one before?
I've seen it. I've not used it. I mean, you and I have both used Ink a lot, haven't we?
Yeah,
I keep being surprised at the amount of assets I own that I've never used.
Like you own this one and didn't know it?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. If it's good, let me know. I'm curious. I was actually doing a video on starter kits earlier this morning, so I probably would have checked this one out if I'd seen it before. Popped it in there.
There is one. I don't think it's even on the asset store. There's another storytelling asset that you can get for Unity. I think it's like a third-party paid one, and it's the one used for Disco Elysium. I remember seeing a thing on it. I forgot the name of it, but they're using a big asset.
Artusi?
Could be. I don't remember the name, but yeah. I just remember I read an article and I was like, oh, that's cool. I didn't know this one existed. Very expensive, but like it had a lot of power by the looks of it.
So here's a question about DI libraries.
Artusi Draft, I think its name was.
It's probably expensive if it's not on the asset store. Check it out. But this
it's not
one was
always that. I think the asset started like before Unity integration, and then they just got a Unity integration after, and they just didn't have something on the store for it. I'm not sure.
Interesting. I feel like a lot of places do that. Like they build these SDKs and then they don't think to actually put their stuff up on the asset store. In fact, when I got the
they actually, let me correct you here. They do have a free asset on the store that's Artusi Draft Importer.
Oh,
so there you go.
Yeah.
But when I was saying not cheap, I really did mean not cheap. What is it? It's like $6.99 per month.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
It's a price.
It's pricey. But again, like you can't argue with results. And I say this 100% true that Disco Elysium is the best narrative game I have played in as long as I can remember. It is probably, and it's the best example of using a narrative system interweaved in gameplay of any game I've ever played. So they use that system better than anything I've ever seen.
Fair. It sounds like a good selling point. Try it out. So I wanted to ask this DI question, but I don't know if you guys know of anything else. Have you guys looked at this? I saw you were talking a little bit about DI in Discord yesterday. Somebody was mentioning the inspector being the DI framework, and there was a little bit of a small discussion about that. But I was curious, do you guys know of any other dependency injection frameworks other than Zenject? That's the only one that I've ever played with.
Have you ever heard of that thing called the inspector? The inspector in Unity, that window that is always there for anybody who opens up Unity. That's a dependency injection framework for you from Unity Technologies themselves. I heard it's pretty good. Everybody's been using it. They don't have a choice.
Yeah. Yeah, the inspector.
Jason, you sound like you have an opinion there.
No, just whenever people go dependency, I've said this before. If you're asking for a DI framework or library in Unity, like, why? What are you trying to solve? That's one of those things where it's like, I know DI is good. I'm working in Unity, and we're back to the NFTs and games problem again. It's like you use tools that solve problems, and realistically, if it's about how do you pass references in Unity, well, there's like 8 ways that are good and about 10 ways that are bad, but they're there. There are already solutions for all of these things. That's not to say, and again, another completely separate thing, this isn't to say dependency inversion is bad. I use dependency inversion literally all the time on all of my code and all my projects. Dependency injection is a different one. It's a whole different concept, and you don't need a DI framework just to use dependency inversion. Whole different topic.
Totally agree. All right, Andrew, I had a question for you. Is there more business sense in creating assets for games, or for like big games, or for small like indies? So where's, and I mean, the question's kind of hard for me to get out. I don't know. I'm struggling. I'm thirsty. But when you're for asset creators, and everybody knows you've got assets, is it better to target smaller developers or like a big developer? Like, who do you create the art assets for? Who would you recommend people create them for? Like, what's their target market if you were going to make some art for the asset store?
If it's art, then most likely your target audience is going to be the smaller indies and hobbyists, because they're the people who can't get art easily. So it's more affordable just to buy art and you can make a game with that. If you're building a tool, however, now you've got a tough problem, because there are a lot of hobbyists and indies who might buy your tool for $50 to $150. And that's a fine price, and it saves them a lot of time, and it works really well. But that same tool to a studio that has funding and 20 developers, they might pay $1,000 a year for it, $2,000 a year, or might pay $200 per seat per year, right? But now you're getting a different class of marketing, a different class of customer support, a different, rolling your own sales page and payment provider page or whatever. And I mean, so it really depends on what you're building and what you're how you're looking to run that business. If it's just putting stuff on the asset store, you'll have more success if you do business stuff like marketing and you put out tutorials, you build a community, all that stuff. But it's kind of like you don't have to. If your stuff is good enough, you can make a decent amount of money just by having it up there. If it's good enough, you'll make more if you do the work, of course. And that's like across the board. But there's more money to be made from enterprise software.
But for art, you would target the smaller studios, what you're saying,
yeah,
right?
The big studios aren't going to buy your art. They'll buy it for prototyping through the asset store. They do that, and every once in a while, you'll see some asset store stuff making the background of some, bigger game. They just didn't take it out, and they're like, it's fine, it's in the background, but they're not going to be used as the hero characters or anything like that.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. So let's take one last question. How do you avoid writing 500-line classes? I think all three of you probably have thoughts on this now.
You don't. You just write it. You just write. Here's the deal. It's
put a
you
limit.
Don't write a 500 line. You write a 2,000 line class. So much easier.
And then wait for me to have a heart attack and bang down your door and help you fix it.
Yeah.
What's that? I couldn't hear you. I have 70,000 lines of class.
I've had a 10,000 line method before. That's the worst I've seen. 10,000 line class I've seen multiple times. 10,000 line method I've seen once. It was the equip method for EverQuest 1. To put an item on, it went through 10,000 lines of code. That was after like 15 years of code changes. But yeah, 10,000 line ifs, nested ifs.
Here's a fun one for you. Terraria has items, tons of items, 5,000 items. Earlier on, it was a single method that was called set defaults for the item class. That set defaults had an if type equals 1, open brackets, set stats, close brackets. That was the first item in the game. The second item, if else, type 2, other stats. The third item, type 3. The fourth item, type 4. At what point do you think that was refactored?
Maybe around 1,000 or so. I don't know.
Never. The answer.
Just keep
5,000 items in if else. Now there was one. Yeah, so there was probably one very big optimization, you could say, there, where the method got so slow to debug that we had to cut it up into different methods. So every 1,000 items, get their own set defaults. Set defaults 1, set defaults 2, set defaults 3, set defaults 4, set defaults 5. And set defaults 5, we finally got to a point where we weren't in the middle of one, where we can start it cleaner. So now it's a switch.
Step down.
There is no way in our lives that we can refactor this cleanly, because there are some things there that are going if type is bigger than or equal to starting number and then smaller than or equal to another number, because a batch of items have the same stats and they're just vanities of each other.
Yeah, and right now I assume that there's no benefit in refactoring that.
Yeah.
Right?
No, okay, so there is a benefit of some performance regarding if else, but it's not in a hot path. We don't initialize a bazillion items per frame. It's not that critical.
Yeah, there's no tangible benefit though, just a risk of accidentally breaking something in those thousands of ifs. Right?
Yeah, and on top of that, there is the concept where the faster you could get out of an if else, the better. And the items that you'll find the most are the items that are in the higher ID, like the lower IDs, the first items that were added, because the game is based around them. So it's really not manifesting itself to be a problem.
Yeah.
I guess though, if we are going to, rather than share war stories of large projects we worked on, try to give you some advice on how to solve this problem as a philosophy. So the truth is, I'm not going to deny this happens. The truth is, we've all worked on big projects. We've all had to write big. It just happens. But the advice that you'd give on how to deal with a large class versus not doing it in the first place or getting out of the habit of letting it happen is very different. So if we're going to talk about how do you solve this, there's a lot to it. This is like the entire field of software architecture. So we're going to keep it very subtle here. I think your biggest indicator is names. So if you want no other advice, when you first start making a class, you don't know what it does yet. You can't name it because you don't actually know what it does. So my advice has always been call it thing doer or stat stuff or whatever it is you need to call it to just get on with your job. And then as you start writing code, you'll hit a point and you'll be like mentally blocking your code. You'll be like, oh, that's the bit which calculates stats. Oh, there we go. That's what it is. So move it to a method called calculate stats. And later on, you might be a thing where you write some more code, and you'll hit a point and something will just be, oh, this is the bit which applies stats. Oh, apply stats. We'll call it that. And at some point, you'll keep going, and now you'll be at a thing which is doing like stat modifiers. And you'll be like, okay, is the thing that applies stats and the thing that calculates stats and the thing that modifies stats, are they really all the same thing? Is there a reason why I might want to change how characters receive stats or change how they're modified separately from how I might create stats? At which case, you now have two things, a thing that creates stats and a thing which does the application of stats. So make a stat creator and a stat applier. So you can, short answer to how do you find this? You basically, you're not going to know the answer up front, and that stresses people out. If you sit there and try to draw a whole load of pie charts and graphs and flow layouts and UML diagrams and try to figure it out, you'll freak yourself out. And if you keep writing code, you'll end up with that scenario where you have to jam an if statement into the line 987 and pray to God you didn't break something. Both scenarios are bad. You need to find the middle ground, which is as you're working through it, feel free to just write the big mess of code, but have that mental limit of 200 lines or so. And when you get to 200 or 300, pause and go, okay, we're at a point where it's probably doing two things. Like if we're at 300, there's at least two things going on here. Can I move them together? These are the bits that do this thing. These are the bits that do this thing. What would a good name for these be? And could I put it in its own class? So let the names drive you. That's the easiest thing. There's a lot more to this, and there's like actual applicational strategies to do this. But if you just want a general, I don't even know how to tackle this, don't start by trying to know the answer. Start by just writing the code you need to write. And as soon as something kind of jumps out at you is, oh, there's a name for what this is doing. It finally makes sense. These 5 pieces of the puzzle is a thing. It is a health system. It is a inventory. You may have made a thing called player originally, and there's some health stuff in there, some inventory stuff in there. But at some point, you can stop and make a judgment call and go, this is inventory, this is health. They don't really need to be in the same thing together. Now you got a player with an inventory and a health. And suddenly that player class has gone from containing all of the contents of all 3 files to a file with 2 references, and each file has its own stuff. So let the names drive your design.
Or you could have a 50,000 lines player class and the game will still feel perfectly fine. You're just never going to be able to maintain it. on that note, as Jason said, splitting things by tasks or feature, to be precise, is fantastic. On top of that, you may want to damn it, now I'm blanking out on the word I wanted to say. But as you work on your project, consider what fields are being accessed by what methods, and you'll often find that there are groups of fields and methods that are not tied to each other. So, for example, a character asking to jump may want things from a rigid body, but it won't care about the character's health, as you said. And the player will form around those separations of groups of methods that use separate fields never interacting with each other. And you could extract those pretty easily. The interactive development environment you're using, any code editor, writer, whatever have you, has ways to let you cleanly extract code, and it will tell you what you're dependent on. So you should liberally use that to save yourself the time and complexity of figuring it all out.
Although, in the complete opposite of that, for the love of God, Raul, I hope you're joking. Do not use partial classes as a nice, neat hack to have multiple people working on classes. Never do that, dude. Yeah, partial classes have one job and one job. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Partial classes have exactly one job, and it's code generation.
Exactly, that's exactly what I was going to say. You only use partial classes when there is a reason why this bit will be rewritten. If you're doing WinForms or something and this is automated and this is your code and you don't want the automation to overwrite your code, that is it. Do not use it for any other purpose.
To clarify on that, for people who don't understand how code generation works, there's literally a portion of code that will look at your code and write more code, and then it will compile them together. Now, for them to be counted as the same thing, it's going to have to either figure out to write into your own class, or it's going to have to make another file somewhere out there that's going to count as the same class. Partial declarations of classes, a class with the keyword partial, can be declared in multiple spots and have multiple things in it, but they all count as the same class. This is why you use the partial keyword to let the code generate more code that counts as your own code.
There's one other thing, just a small tangent, but I just want to add to that. If there's one thing that I see every time is the biggest indicator of causing big classes. So forget about splitting them up and all the stuff. Before we even get to there, why do your classes get too big in the first place? And the biggest cause of this in every single Unity project I've ever seen is something called the law of Demeter. And it's very, very simple, but it happens all the time. It's if I have a selectable object, for example, and I pick up a thing and I select it, and I have a script which manages that, I could be very tempted to go selectable object as a game object, and I would say game object dot get component dot rigid body dot disable game object dot get component material dot set color, whatever. And so this script is doing all of this stuff. But if you ask yourself what it's really doing, you're saying selectable dot select, and select means turn off its rigid body and change its color and do whatever. So the thing is, let each script do his own job. If you have a thing which is a bunch of behavior, like turning off renderers and rigid bodies or whatever else, don't start diving into the object, taking its pieces out and acting on them. That's how your code gets big and bloated, because you're basically grabbing internal components of another thing and start messing with them. If each thing that you're passing around your system, like an item or a game or a character or an inventory or a weapon or a robot or whatever it is, don't just have an object and then like start getting components off the other object. Give it a parent name, call it robot, or as I've done before, if you have a plane might have a turret, it might have a motor, it might have various different pieces of the puzzle. Rather than calling plane.getComponent motor, thing.getComponent, whatever, just say plane.shoot target. And then inside, the plane says, I use turret.fire or whatever. So don't inspect and interact with the subcomponents of things. Move your code in such a way where it only interacts with the thing it interacts with. And if you do that, your code will organically get smaller and easier, because you're not writing 10 lines in place. You're writing thing.do thing, then if thing.do other thing, get other thing.do thing, and everything will start to be much, much smaller, because it's very hard to write that complicated.
It's good advice. I'm showing yours anyway. So I wanted to give everybody a chance to just really briefly share the stuff they got going on. And what is this? This is a Terraria graphic novel?
Yeah, we recently revealed that it's being worked with a partner company, and I wasn't involved a lot in the process, but it's freaking awesome. And I just wanted to say that it's been really fun to see it evolve over time, and I'm super excited for it.
Cool.
There's a news post on Terraria's news section on Steam, and there's also on the forums the same post, just with more discussions.
Oh, very cool. I'll have to grab it. I still need to get my sword hung up. It's still sitting right there. I'm waiting for Dave to print me a mount so I can put it up in the background. It's driving me nuts. I got to just show up at his house one day. Just pull up like, here's a sword, mount it. He'd definitely be able to, though. Every time I'm over there, he's printing something. And then, Andrew, you had something cool to share too, right?
Yeah, well, I've got this game modules bundle, which I use for my game, and I think is quite snazzy, and I make updates for it from time to time. But I've been thinking, it's also very vague because it's essentially a data creation and management and utilization system of sorts. And I was thinking about making like YouTube videos where I set up a game, like set up a tower defense game using the game modules bundle, set up this game. Which could be fun, could be interesting. I think that would be good for me just to use it in more different ways and kind of showcase how to use it. Yeah. But I don't know what type of games to make. So it's just been something I've been thinking about for the past 4 or 5 days. So if anyone has ideas of what you would like to see set up with this bundle, with this data, tool bundle, come to the Discord, let me know. And maybe I'll do that because I'm eager to try something new with this and just to kind of demo how it can be used. Since I think it's one of those things where it's kind of vague and you can do a lot with it. You can do a lot more than what it looks like on the surface. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be cool. Yeah, when are you thinking about doing that?
Hey, when I have free time, which is,
whenever you stream next.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like I was thinking about a tower defense game, the other day, but I've got other things to stream too, so I gotta work it into my schedule and all. But it's certainly something that I would like to do, and I think it would give me a good break from the other stuff I do. And it's not like I need more stuff to do. I've got too much to do already, but why not?
It'd be interesting and productive. So
yeah,
it's cool. And then Jason, you had mentioned that Jake opened up this game for demo, right? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So this is a fun, actually ties into a few things first. So this game, Hostile Mars, is made by a friend of ours, Jake, and to kind of highlight something that Jason Weimann's been talking about for a lot recently, I met him at a Wednesday meetup thing, a mastermind group, as set up by Jason Weimann. This is before I knew him that well. So that was like 4 years ago or something. I joined a meetup, and Jake here was one of the guys who was working on a project. And so for the last few years, we've been watching this game in production as he's been showing us things, and we've been helping debug issues and kind of look at new features and design and stuff. So it's very exciting for me to see it sort of out there able to be played. So this is his game, Hostile Mars. It's kind of got that satisfactory vibe that is you're building bases, and you can build turrets and automation machines, and it's got all of the expected things in terms of making factories with conveyor belts, with robots that help you do things, as well as waves and waves of enemies. But what's really cool about it is the enemies it's all done with ECS, and the enemies are all physics based. So you can really knock them around with stuff, and you've got thousands of robots attacking your base, and you can use things like spinning weapons, and you can launch them to the air, and all of your weapons will bounce them around. So it's got a lot of a fun physics sandbox kind of thing to it.
Yeah, and there's also lots of crafting involved, and they all drop stuff, and it's like it has a really satisfying loop of getting more materials to make more base to fight more enemies.
And the slide jump is so fun. Like, he's got this special like slide jump tech, which is just really satisfying to leap around the map. And then, as a fun Easter egg, he's currently working on another patch build. This is a bit of an inside baseball, as they say. He's still trying to figure out some of the elements for the voice acting and the narrative portions at the start of the game for the tutorial. And so he had one version, and he's thinking of how to change it. It was some new story points that have been added. He's got story written. And as a test, I did a voice clip as an example of what the opening sequence could be. And so in the next update, the opening title sequence will be me as the guy over the comms giving you the introduction. So there you go. You can look forward to that.
That's enough of a reason to grab it alone, right? And there's a free demo, so you can just go download it and actually play it right now. Go try it out, give them some feedback, and I assume you'd probably be really happy to get that feedback too. So definitely go check it out.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the demo has been running yesterday and today, so it might end soon. So,
well, I linked it in chat, so you got at least today to go hop in there and try it out. And then, did you have any other things to share, Jason?
No, not right now. I'm still taking some me time for another couple months. I think I'll have some stuff after that.
Fair enough. Cool.
Once you've shrunk to a quarter of your size and you're entirely zoomed out, and
exactly, yeah. Once I've got it set up, so this is all like a studio, and the back walls can fall apart, and it's twice the size, and I've got all my studio set up correctly.
You're just gonna knock him down live on stream, like it's gonna, or you're gonna green screen it. Green screen, knock him down.
I do have the green screen. I should probably try setting that up.
Nice. I'm really excited for the. I get that Tilt 5 thing is supposed to show up today. It's FedEx, so I don't believe the tracking, but it says it's going to show up today, and it's got mixed reality stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. Speaking of things that are arriving, yeah, actually, it might be more than 2 months because my Steam Deck's on the way, so I may be completely off the grid for the next who knows how long when that finally arrives.
Nice. Cool. Well, all right, guys, I'm going to wrap it here. I'll be releasing a video tomorrow, so if you're watching, please like, subscribe, share the stream, hit thumbs up, leave us a comment if you have questions that we didn't get to, or you just want to say hi or help the YouTube algorithm. And congrats to our 2 winners. Make sure you email me. And I guess we will see you again next week. So bye, everybody.
Bye.